Chapter 2169. As soon as Gao Qingtu made his move, the dozens of disciples who were accompanying him reacted. They used their magical power to create a light screen that enveloped the entire city. The cultivators outside could not figure out what was going on when they saw that the city was filled with qi activity. Out of caution, they immediately withdrew their attacks. Seeing this, Gao Qingtu immediately told Shu Qing, "Try to capture a few people and ask them about the situation here." Shu Qing nodded and left. He quickly understood the situation. The cultivators on the other side were from a sect called Luo sect. The people of this sect only needed to follow a ritual and worship the devil god to obtain power. Most of the known countries in this land had fallen into their hands. If they had not fallen here, this city would have followed in their footsteps. Gao Qingtu was deep in thought. When he was visiting the mountain and sea realm, he had heard a cultivator from the Yaoyin clan mention a sect that worshipped the devil god. It was very similar. He could not help but wonder if he had returned to the four major tribes. If that was the case, it would not be difficult for him to return, because most of the heavens under Yuanzun had a gate between the two realms. But now was not the time to think about this. He said, "We should not stay here for long. We should leave first." Although the cultivators outside did not have high cultivation, there would inevitably be many people with high cultivation in a sect. If they came here, there would inevitably be a fight. And even if there was a fight, it would have to be done after understanding the situation. Gao Gua said, "Master, what about the people in the city?" Gao Qingtu said decisively, "Take them with us." The city had been besieged for many days, and many of the able-bodied people were injured or dead. Most of the people left were the old, the weak, the women, and the children. If he had not seen it, it would have been fine. But since he had seen it, he could not ignore it. As soon as he said this, the disciples used their magical power and swept the remaining 10,000 people up into the sky. Then they went to a place where the Luo sect's forces could not reach. Although he left quickly, a few days later, there were still many people from the Luo denomination chasing after him. Therefore, he personally stayed behind to cover the rear. Fortunately, he did not see anyone with high cultivation, but the disciples who stayed behind to cover the rear were able to deal with them easily. After getting rid of the Luo denomination people, they quickly caught up with the people who had previously retreated and found a deserted valley. They chiseled a mountain into a cave, opened up a cave, and set up a formation. However, no one knew how the Luo denomination managed to find their way to the front of the mountain in just a few days. Moreover, among the people who came this time, there was a Taoist whose cultivation was almost comparable to Gao Qingtu's. However, it didn't take long for Gao Qingtu to realize that this man didn't seem to have any experience in fighting people of the same generation as him. Gao Qingtu, on the other hand, was different. Back in the mountain and sea realm, he had spent almost every day fighting outsider beasts and monsters. Although he couldn't be considered an expert in battle, he was far superior to this man. It didn't take long for him to kill the man, and none of the other attackers managed to escape. However, this time, a number of disciples from the Great Liang sect had also died. After the fiasco, the Luo sect did not seem to give up. A few months later, they came to attack again. However, it was different this time because the restrictive formation in the mountain had been set up, and they were easily wiped out. To Gao Qingtu's surprise, there were a few disciples who had been stagnant in their cultivation bases. In fact, it could even be said that there was no room for improvement. However, in the fierce battle, their magic power actually began to improve. He suddenly realized that he had neglected something in the past. After making arrangements for his subordinates, he sank into deep thought. He felt that even though he passed down the Tao everywhere he went in the past, if he encountered a slightly stronger outer Tao, it would be able to easily destroy all of his efforts. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but think to himself, if I want to pass down the Tao, I still need to have my own sect. In fact, he also knew that even if he didn't have such thoughts, as long as the Tao continued to exist, then it would naturally follow the path of protecting its own Tao and suppressing the heretic Tao. However, that process would take hundreds or even thousands of years. But now, due to the special circumstances, he had to do it ahead of time. After thinking for a few days, he summoned Gao Guo and told her about his idea. Gao Guo said, "Teacher, since we're establishing a sect, what name should we call it?" Gao Qingtu said, "The Tao lies within the evolution of all things. Our Tao should be called by the word evolution." Gao Guo said, "Evolution." Gao Qingtu nodded slowly. In fact, he had another choice that seemed to be more suitable than this word. However, for some reason, he couldn't pronounce the word no matter how hard he tried. Even when he thought about it, his thoughts would deviate, so he could only use this as a replacement. Gao Guo muttered a few times and said, "Then, we will worship teacher as the sect leader." "But teacher, since we're establishing a sect, we should trace back to its source. I wonder, which almighty should we worship as the sect leader?" Gao Qingtu replied, "Naturally, we should worship the Almighty who created this Tao as the sect leader." Gao Guo thought for a while and said, "But teacher also mentioned that we don't know who the sect leader is. Why don't we worship the four great Yuan Zun as the sect leader?" He had heard from Gao Qingtu that there were thousands of Tao in the world, and most of them could be traced back to the four great Yuan Zun. Therefore, this kind of worship was not wrong after all. Gao Qingtu shook his head and said, "I think that this person's ability is above the four great Yuan Zun. However, for the sake of caution, we might as well not name him. We will only worship him according to the etiquette of our sect's sect leader. What you need to do is to select children as disciples, and I will personally teach them Tao of this level." Now, other than Gao Guo, those who followed him were Du Liang sect's disciples in name. Although these people could be used by him, they couldn't be counted as disciples of the sect. Therefore, he had to teach a new batch of disciples here. Gao Guo bowed and cupped his fists. "Yes, teacher. I will do it now." In just a few days, more than 100 children were sent to Gao Qingtu's seat. These were all ordinary people who were rescued from the previous city. Within half a year, thousands of young people were sent one after another. After the Luo denomination's failure last time, they seemed to have realized that Gao Qingtu and his people were not to be trifled with. Moreover, they saw that Gao Qingtu and his people were hiding deep in the mountains, so they did not come to attack again. However, Gao Qingtu knew that he would have to fight with this generation eventually because once he established a sect, he would definitely expand outwards. Not only would it cause conflict with the Luo denomination, but it would also cause conflict with the Tao of the outside world, which might even lead to war. However, he still insisted on doing so because he had realized that fighting was also a part of understanding Tao. In the past, what he did was only the Tao of one person. Once he embarked on this Tao, then it would be the Tao of 10,000 people, the Tao of 10 million people, and even the Tao of all living beings in the world. However, this did not mean that he had to fight to the death with others. As the saying goes, harmony means coexistence, disharmony means strife. If he saw everyone as his enemy, then he would be digging his own grave. In the blink of an eye, 30 years had passed. The original barren mountain had changed greatly. The ridge of the mountain was covered with palaces and pavilions, and at the bottom of the mountain, numerous deep and vast underground palaces had been opened up. Above the main hall, there was a memorial tablet that was about 3 meters tall, but it was somewhat similar to the Dharma inheritance tablet. There was no name written on it, and there was no background at the bottom. Gao Qingtu stood below the steps with Gao Guo. After 30 years of preparation, he now had thousands of disciples under him. He felt that the time was ripe to open the sect and raise the name of the Yen sect. The first thing he had to do was to destroy the Luo denomination and turn this world into the dojo of the Yen sect. Gao Qingtu walked forward and bowed to the memorial tablet. He recited a few words in his heart. Jiaozu is above, disciple Gao Qingtu has established the Yen sect today without any selfish thoughts. I only wish to change the heaven and earth so that the world will be the same. Initially, he did not think much and bowed down. Suddenly, he felt a gaze from the unseen world. At the same time, the entire sky suddenly darkened. A spiritual light soared from the sect ancestors' memorial tablet, illuminating the universe. After flashing for 10 breaths, it disappeared just now. Gao Qingtu stared blankly. Gao Guo's voice trembled. Teacher, just now. Gao Qingtu took a deep breath and said, this is the sect ancestor's response. He looked at the memorial tablet above and said, I once thought that in order to ask the sect ancestor about the foundation of Tao, I would need to go through thousands of difficulties and all kinds of tempering. In fact, I was wrong. In fact, the Tao is right beside me, so why do I need to ask from so far away? Gao Guo was extremely excited when she heard that. Just now, when the vision appeared, the sun and moon were hidden, and the world lost its color. It could be imagined how powerful the sect ancestor was. Gao Qingtu turned around and said in a deep voice, since the sect ancestor has responded, the destruction of the Luoism will happen today. Gao Guo, go down and pass down the order, gather the followers, and follow me to attack the headquarters of the Luoism. In Busu's Heaven Qing Huan Palace, Zhang Yan saw this scene. Just now, he did not deliberately cast any spell. It was just that the qi dynamic that was scattered outside was worshipped by the direct disciple, so it responded spontaneously. He had already expected that there would be a direct disciple who was determined to establish a sect. In these 100 years, it was the time when his Tao was flourishing, so it was inevitable that this would happen. And Gao Qingtu was the first person to do this. However, there were pros and cons to this action. The disadvantage was that once the sect of Yen was established, it would be difficult for many sects to regard this new method as a method of inheritance, so they would definitely look for other methods to replace it. However, major sects like Qinsong and Shaoqing had originally developed new methods on their own, and had never accepted external methods. As for the small sects, they had no other choice. Most of them would use whichever Tao was more suitable. However, his Tao did not require any external objects. Even if there was no spiritual opportunity, it could still be cultivated. This point was something that few Tao could compare to, so the impact would be a little, but it would not be that big. And when the sect of Yen was established, the benefits came along with it. He could see that a lot of strange powers had been cut off. This was because the fate of the Tao that he had established was completed. The Weili that was rejected by him was destined to not be able to enter the world again. Moreover, there was no place for them to exist in the past and future. This result was directly reflected at this moment. However, there were still strands of strange powers involved in the human's thoughts and desires. This was because as long as there was a living being who still knew of the existence of the Almighty Person of Spirit Refinement, even if it was just a rumor, then the Weili would not really be destroyed. Usually, only when these living beings were allowed to step onto the path of Tao and have knowledge of the Tao in their hearts, it would be best if they believed in another spirit refinement Taishang. Just now, they could gradually get rid of these. What Zhang Yan was doing now was exactly this. However, when he did not use his own Weili, it was impossible for him to send everyone onto the path of Tao. Fortunately, these strange powers were ultimately only a small number. As long as he continued, he could make them weaker and weaker. As his comprehension of Busu gradually deepened, if everything went smoothly, it would not be difficult to completely eliminate them in the end. Chapter 2170. Zhang Yan sat and rotated his mana to slowly wear down the remaining foreign forces. Every time he wore down a little, he felt his Tao thoughts become clearer. In the lower realm, as soon as Gao Qingtu's sect was established, it was as if there was a connection in the unseen world. Many cultivators who practiced this Tao in the lower realm began to worship the ancestral tablets. This caused more and more foreign forces to be driven out. In Zhang Yan's eyes, what used to be very vague in Busha Tian was now gradually becoming clear. This undoubtedly showed that up until now, his approach could be said to be very correct. However, due to certain reasons, he could not actively interfere with the rise and fall of the Tao. He could only let the followers do as they pleased. If they were slaughtered by the foreign sects, then the only way was to establish the Tao and start all over again. In fact, there was no need to worry too much about this. Today, in the myriad heavens and myriad heavens, there were stone tablets that he had scattered. Some had already been seen and worshipped, some were still buried in the sand, waiting to be found one day. Because this Tao did not need to use external objects to practice, most of it still fell on barren lands without spiritual opportunity. Once a living being came into contact with and understood the Tao, there was no doubt that it would lead more people to embark on this path. In this way, it could ensure that the torch would never be extinguished. After sitting for another 10 years, he only felt a slight movement in his mind, as if a layer of concealment had been removed from his eyes. His divine will became more rounded, and he knew that his understanding of Busha Tian had entered a deeper level. But he also understood that this was more or less the result after clearing part of the foreign forces in the lower, middle, and upper heavens. If he wanted to gain more, then he could only obtain it from the upper heavens. Some of the foreign forces were easy to deal with, because the owners of some of the foreign forces were even weaker than him. As long as the Tao he created could be steadily advanced, it would be fine. But some were very difficult to deal with, because their source might come from some Vedanta. Fortunately, as long as the Vedanta did not return, he could eventually find a way to deal with them. Just like Ji Zhuang and Yao Han, even though part of their power had returned, they still could not suppress him. He even had the opportunity to suppress this generation. However, this Weili level was extremely high after all, and the only way was to slowly wear it down. Therefore, the pace was bound to be slowed down. He silently calculated in his heart. Based on the current situation, if there was no additional opportunity, it was difficult to say whether he could succeed before Yao Han, Ji Zhuang, and the others' power returned. He pondered again. Now, he could only clean up the foreign forces that could be dealt with, and think of a way to deal with the remaining power. This time, he once again comprehended the profundities of the great Tao. Thus, he decided to make a move again and slightly perfected the technique passed down to the lower realm. Even though it wasn't complete and didn't point towards the great Tao, it could allow cultivators to cultivate more perfectly. As soon as he made up his mind, he flicked his sleeves, and spots of divine light sprinkled toward the world, spreading to the heavens and worlds. Somewhere in the Luo sect's headquarters in the heavenly realm, a loud bang was heard and a towering Dharma tower collapsed. At the same time, a Taoist fell from the sky with a look of unwillingness. Before he landed on the ground, he was blasted into pieces by the manna that surged from all directions. Gao Qingtu stood in the sky, and he sensed that there was no longer a Luo sect disciple alive. Just now, the defeated person should be the last Taoist cultivator guarding the Luo sect's headquarters. With this person's death, it meant that the sect no longer existed in this world. He looked around, and thousands of Yen sect disciples gathered around him. Under his leadership, it only took 10 years to completely annihilate the Luo sect that was spread across the entire land. In fact, it was very difficult to distinguish which was superior between the two methods. Teaching Yen did not require any external objects of spiritual vigor to cultivate. As long as one was suitable for cultivation, then one would be able to cultivate smoothly all the way until one encountered a mental obstacle. The Luo sect only needed to worship the ritual to obtain mana. Although everyone could enter the path of cultivation, due to different qualifications, the level of the cultivator was not uniform, and there were very few people who could reach the upper state. There were no more than 5 people in the entire land who could cultivate to Gao Qingtu's level. In terms of the strength of the higher-ups, Yen's sect was originally at a disadvantage. However, this generation was not good at fighting, and did not have the means to refine magic tools or prohibitions. Therefore, when the two sides fought, the Luo sect kept losing, until it was completely annihilated today. At this time, Gao Guo floated to Gao Qingtu's side, pointed to a distance, and said, "Teacher, what should we do with the demon god statue? Should we ask someone to push it down and smash it?" Gao Qingtu looked over, and the most obvious thing here was the towering demon god statue, which was worshipped by hundreds of millions of believers of the Luo sect. There was such a statue in the altar of the Luo sect that was attacked in the past. However, before they could destroy it, it would automatically turn into dust. For some unknown reason, this final statue did not have such a reaction. It was still vaguely visible that it was wrapped by a layer of yellow, misty brilliance. He thought about it carefully. This time, it was not only a collision between Tao techniques, but also a conflict between the two sections. This statue was undoubtedly the source, and only by eliminating the root of the problem could this place truly be turned into the dojo of Yen's sect. However, just now, when his thoughts turned to this point, he suddenly felt as if something was looking at him. At the same time, his body seemed to be sinking infinitely. Just when he secretly shouted that it was not good, a clear chi was produced from the ancestral aperture, and circulated around his body. In an instant, that feeling was expelled. He could not help but feel slightly relieved. He silently prayed for the protection of the sect ancestor, and decisively waved his hand and said, "Push it down." Immediately, there were strong men coming forward, and the disciples of Yen's sect who were flying in the sky also blasted out their magic power. In an instant, the statue of the demon god was pushed down and smashed. That was not all, they threw the remaining gravel into the furnace to temper it until it disappeared. Just now, Gao Guo said, "Teacher, the door of 2 realms is behind the mountain, and I have already sent people to occupy it. Teacher, do you want to take a look?" Gao Qingtu thought about the matter just now, and thought for a moment, then said, "Overthrowing the Luo sect and putting an entire realm under the control of the sect is not a small matter. We should first worship the sect ancestor, then talk about other matters. You go and prepare first." Gao Guo obeyed and left. At this moment, Shu Qing came up, bowed, and asked, "Teacher Gao, are you going to find the mountain and sea realm?" Previously, when they attacked the Luo sect, he and a group of Duliang sect disciples supported them. Because the only confirmed door of 2 realms was inside the main altar of the Luo sect. If they did not destroy the sect, it would be impossible to take down the door. Gao Qingtu said, "I will not go back on my promise to Dharma Lord Guan." But according to the records, the Luo sect came from outside the realm, and it is very likely that they are behind the door of 2 realms. So if we go there, it is very likely that we will encounter stronger enemies. We cannot be reckless here, and I will immediately send disciples to investigate the situation. If there is no danger, we will continue to search for the whereabouts of the mountain and sea. This was very reasonable, and Shu Qing bowed again and said, "Everything will be arranged by Teacher Gao." Then he left. Not long after Gao Guo left, she brought the memorial tablet of the sect ancestor. Gao Qingtu walked up the steps and led a group of disciples to pay their respects. Apart from the time when the sect was established, there had been no other unusual signs on the memorial tablet. But this time, just now, when everyone kowtowed, they saw a part in the sky, and a beam of spiritual light shone down onto the memorial tablet. Then it shone on the ground, and countless inscriptions appeared on the ground. As the sect leader, Gao Qingtu had the most profound Taoist techniques among those present. He could immediately see the clues, and his eyes filled with joy. This was clearly the patriarch passing down his Taoist techniques again. He immediately thought that the sect leader had left these signs not only because of the destruction of the Luo sect, but also because he was encouraging him to expand. Over the past 10 years, many disciples' strength had increased greatly. This meant that fighting was indeed beneficial to the cultivation of Taoist techniques. He bowed again and said loudly, "Disciple understands the sect leader's intention. I will definitely go to the heavens and spread my Taoist techniques." In the silence, Yuan Mei was traveling back and forth between several realms. He had already found the location of the fragment of good fortune. In order to avoid Jizhuang Doran's mana ripples from time to time, he had to be extra careful. Now, he was only one step away from devouring the fragment. The reason why he did not move forward was not because he was afraid, but because he was waiting for a better opportunity to escape once he was exposed. At this moment, he had also thought through some things. In fact, there was no need for him to be so afraid. Patriarch Yahan probably wanted to use him to distract Ji Zhuang so that Ji Zhuang could do something else. Ji Zhuang obviously needed him now. Since he had helped him once, he would definitely help him again. Let's not talk about this. As long as he devoured the fragment, he would be able to use the Taoist techniques to try and pass the enlightenment stage. If he could pass, he would have the ability to fight against these two. After waiting for a long time, he finally saw an opportunity. His mana surged, and the next moment, he brought the fragment of good fortune out of the realms. Without stopping, he turned around and disappeared. Almost at the same time, a majestic whaley chased after him. Ji Zhuang could sense that Yuan Mei had obtained another fragment. If Yuan Mei successfully devoured it, his cultivation would clearly increase. This time, he could not allow this person to continue to roam freely. In order to prevent Patriarch Yao Han from interfering, he diverted a portion of the good fortune Pauline's power. Patriarch Yao Han's expression changed slightly, and a trace of vigilance appeared on his face. He hadn't expected that Yuan Mei would actually rely on himself to find another good fortune fragment. Yuan Mei seemed to be slightly out of his control, and he was already considering whether to give up on Yuan Mei. If it was as he thought earlier, and there was an external force interfering here, then they probably wouldn't sit idly by and watch Yuan Mei be captured. So he decided not to make a move for now and wait to see how the situation developed before making a decision. Yuan Mei fled in panic under the pursuit of Ji Zhuang's whaley. However, the help he expected did not come. He began to panic, especially when Ji Zhuang showed that he would not stop until he captured him. At this time, an idea flashed in his mind, and he stopped hiding in the realms. Instead, he went straight for Bushutian. Chapter 2171. When Ji Zhuang saw Yuan Mei heading towards Bushutian, he couldn't help but frown. For a moment, he couldn't figure out what Yuan Mei's goal was. He couldn't help but wonder if Zhang Yan had already interfered in this matter. To be cautious, he restrained the surging whaley fluctuations and sent a message to Bushutian to ask about this matter. Right now, he didn't want to have another opponent like Zhang Yan, so he didn't say a word even when his Dao inheritance was destroyed. Of course, this was only a small matter to him. Bushutian was Zhang Yan's territory, and those Dao techniques were just a test. He was already prepared to abandon them. Zhang Yan also saw Yuan Mei heading towards Bushutian. He originally didn't want to pay attention to him because Yuan Mei couldn't enter Bushutian. Right now, he only wanted to enter the third stage as soon as possible. As long as the battles outside didn't involve him, he didn't need to care. After seeing Ji Zhuang's message, he wanted to reply, but at this time, he suddenly had a feeling. He used a technique to make a divination and found that there was something strange about this place. Yuan Mei didn't seem to be coming towards Bushutian on his own accord. Instead, it seemed like he was being pushed by another force. Moreover, this force was something that he had never come into contact with before. His thoughts turned. The situation here was a bit unusual. It seemed that this person wasn't as he had thought. He was completely a pawn of the Yao Han ancestor, and there should be some external force interfering. Right now, his choices were to either drive Yuan Mei away, ignore him, or directly help Ji Zhuang to capture this person. He wanted to act according to the last method. This way, he could prevent that force from growing. Even if this allowed Ji Zhuang to solve a thorny problem, it also eliminated a possible hidden danger. But just now, when he was thinking about this, he saw Yuan Mei's figure turn as if he had sensed some danger and directly disappear. He raised his eyebrows. That person must have sensed danger and thus retreated. However, since they had already left, there was no need for him to chase after them. Ji Zhuang would be the one to worry about the matters here. He should focus on his cultivation. Just now, Yuan Mei had come to Busu Tian because he suddenly had an idea. If he was lucky, he might be able to get Zhang Yan's help. If not, he could use Ji Zhuang's suspicion and fear of Zhang Yan to make him not chase so closely. This was indeed the case, allowing him to catch his breath. But at this time, he suddenly felt an unprecedented sense of danger. He immediately knew that Zhang Yan's attitude toward him was not very friendly, so he didn't dare to come to Busu Tian again. Taking advantage of the moment when Ji Zhuang's magic power slowed down a bit, he hurriedly escaped into the main world. The Yao Han ancestor had been paying attention to the changes in the void. He originally wanted to see if there was someone else interfering with Yuan Mei, but he didn't expect that Yuan Mei had used Ji Zhuang's desire to avoid conflict with Busu Tian to escape. He chuckled. If Yuan Mei could escape Ji Zhuang's pursuit like this, then it was too easy. Without the Yao Han ancestors' help, Yuan Mei would have been captured by Ji Zhuang last time. At this time, the Yao Han ancestor was still observing and had no intention of helping Yuan Mei. Unless Yuan Mei was truly at his wit's end and did not show any external help, he would consider this matter. Just as he expected, even though Yuan Mo had a moment of respite, in reality, Ji Zhuang's Fa Li quickly caught up and he couldn't get rid of it no matter what. However, if Ji Zhuang wanted to take him down, without using the Lotus of Good Fortune, it wouldn't be something that could be done in a short amount of time. He didn't know how long it would take. Yuan Mei was also under pressure from the chase. He didn't understand why the Yao Han ancestor was not helping him. Was it because the Yao Han ancestor had given up on him, or was it because now was not the right time? However, there was a force in the depths of his heart that kept urging him to pass the enlightenment stage as soon as possible. Although he might not be able to fight against Ji Zhuang immediately, he would at least be able to get out of his current predicament. Logically speaking, he was a person seeking external help. In order to pass this gate, he had to first increase his cultivation to a certain level and find the great Dao Xian principle. Then, he would come back and slowly resolve the Wanzhen. This was also why the Yao Han ancestor was especially confident in him. He believed that with his original temperament, he would not be able to reach this stage in a short period of time. Perhaps before he found the right path, he would have already found his Weili. However, the technique that Yuan Mei obtained was completely different. It was about using his natural ability as a creation treasure spirit. First, he would let the Wanzhen replace him, and then he would replace the Wanzhen. This way, not only would he complete the enlightenment gate, he would not have to worry about his mental state anymore. This was because the Wanzhen would only pursue the Tao to live and would not care about anything else. However, he did not dare to do this so quickly. Even if he did not communicate with his fellow Taoists and did not understand the difference between seeking external help and seeking internal help, he knew very well that the enlightenment gate was not easy to pass. If he was unlucky, he might not be able to replace the Wanzhen and return. Then, he would no longer be the same person as before. While he was hesitating here, Ji Zhuang's Fa Li had once again closed in on him. The situation in the field was becoming more and more urgent. Looking at the situation, he might be captured in the next moment. This forced him to make a decision quickly. If he was captured by Ji Zhuang, the result would not be being suppressed. Instead, he would definitely be banished into eternal silence. On the other hand, if he passed the enlightenment gate, he might have a chance of survival. After barely dodging another fluctuation of mana, he knew he could not delay any longer. He steeled his heart and began to circulate his mana according to the method recorded in the technique. At the same time, Taoist Ji Zhuang sensed that something was wrong. He made a slight calculation in his heart and discovered that Yuan Mo was actually trying to unravel the barrier. This caused his expression to sink. With Yuan Mo's temperament, he also felt that there was a high chance of failure. Then, the person who would replace him would be Wanzhen, and that would be even more difficult to deal with. Thus, he made a prompt decision and immediately held the Lotus of Good Fortune and waved it at Yuan Mo, hoping to be able to stop this matter before Yuan Mo could unravel Wanzhen. Ancestor Yao Han, who was watching the battle, couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression. He also didn't expect Yuan Mei to dare pass the enlightenment gate. He also thought that it was highly unlikely for Yuan Mei to succeed. However, he could at least confirm that even if Yuan Mei had an external influence, it was not strong enough to fight against Ji Zhuang and his Weili. He couldn't help but calculate in his heart. If he didn't stop Yuan Mei, then he would lose this chess piece. If Yuan Mei failed to pass the enlightenment gate and was replaced by the Wanzhen, then this seemed to be more suitable to tie down Ji Zhuang's energy than his old master. Thinking of this, he made up his mind. He lifted up Creation Pauline and flashed towards the void. This time, he didn't directly stop Ji Zhuang Daoren. Instead, he only disturbed the Pauline's power. When Ji Zhuang Daoren sensed Yao Han's attack, he snorted. In order to prevent the two Pauline's power from colliding too much and drawing out something else, he could only retract the Pauline's power. Just now, he was a bit too hasty. He released Pauline too early, allowing Ancestor Yao Han to attack. If he didn't suppress it, then Ancestor Yao Han didn't know how much Pauline's power he would use, so he might not dare to do anything. After Yuan Mei circulated the technique, his mind suddenly became dazed. He found himself sinking into a deep void. Then, a figure that looked exactly like him suddenly appeared in front of him. They looked at each other. This person's facial features were originally a bit blurry, but as the two came closer, they gradually became clear. Yuan Mei suppressed his thoughts of fighting back. According to the technique, he didn't need to fight. He just needed to gradually retract his consciousness and use the technique to hide it. At the same time, he just needed to let the Wanzhen's power invade him. Next, the Wanzhen might try to find a way to erase his consciousness. But as long as he could hold on, he could wait for the Heaven's Secret to appear and replace the Wanzhen. When the other Yuan Mei saw that he didn't have any resistance, he quickly came forward. His magic power surged and engulfed him. In the void, Yuan Mei's originally lifeless eyes suddenly regained their light. However, they were unusually calm and indifferent. There was no longer any of the panic from before. In the face of Ji Zhuang's magic power, Yuan Mei's body flickered and escaped into a certain part of the present world. Ji Zhuang's expression became even more unsightly. In that instant, Yuan Ho's mana and qi activity had both increased greatly. It was clear that he had passed the barrier of understanding the truth. If it was just a simple increase in his mana, then it would be fine. But now, his consciousness had most likely been replaced by stubbornness. This would make him even more difficult to deal with. If that was all, it would be fine. But he could feel that the existence had increased his magic power again. Perhaps it was not far from returning to its original Weili state. He thought for a while and immediately produced a talisman, sending it to Bushutian. Zhang Yan also sensed the change in Yuan Mei's aura, and his eyes couldn't help but flash. At this time, he saw a talisman flashing outside Busu's sky, so he formed a clone outside. The talisman shook, and the figure of Ji Zhuang appeared from it. He cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said, "Has Sir come for Yuan Mei again?" Taoist Ji Zhuang sighed and said, "That's exactly why I'm here. I'm afraid you've seen it just now. There are many suspicious points about that Yuan Mo. I suspect that there's an external force that we don't know about. If we don't destroy him as soon as possible, I'm afraid it'll cause even more trouble." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Oh, where does that external force come from? Even fellow Taoist doesn't know." Ji Zhuang Daoran said, "I really don't know. In the past, I could use the power of creation Pauline to investigate, but now that fellow Taoist Yao Han is holding the lotus, I'm afraid that even if I see it, I won't be able to confirm it. But let's not talk about that external force. As long as Yuan Mei's magic power continues to increase, that existence will recover his magic power sooner or later. Then the barrier we built will be useless." Zhang Yan did not comment on this. He said, "Then what does Sir want I to do?" Ji Zhuang Daoran said, "I will use all my strength to pursue Yuan Mei. If that Yao Han attacks again, I hope fellow Taoist can stop him. That way, it will not be difficult to take down this person." Chapter 2172. Zhang Yan thought about it for a bit. If Ji Zhuang left him, there was really no way he could catch Yuan Mei. It was just that he didn't want to pay too much of a price. Right now, he just wanted to use this matter to set himself against Ancestor Yao Han and create the illusion that he was being roped in. However, he still decided to agree. Just now, he sensed that there was something wrong with Yuan Mei. There should be some other power mixed in. The heavenly order that Ji Zhuang was maintaining was actually very beneficial to him, especially since it could separate the alien power from the living beings in the heavens. It was especially useful. Before this strange power was completely eradicated, he didn't want anyone to ruin this situation. In fact, Yao Han and Ji Zhuang's goal was very clear. They wanted nothing more than to recover their original strength. That was why their every move was easy to guess, but when it came to Yuan Mei, it was hard to say what would happen. Also, because his magic power had increased several times, that existence's Whaley had increased too much, so he couldn't be allowed to continue. He said, "Don't worry, just capture this person. As for fellow Taoist Yao Han, I will try to stop him." Zhizhuang Daoren felt relieved after getting a response. He bowed, and with a flash of light, he disappeared. Zhang Yan spread out his magic power, and waves of Whaley ripples fell into the void. He clearly expressed that he was willing to work together with Zhizhuang to get rid of Yuan Mei. He believed that with Ancestor Yao Han's personality, he would definitely try his best to avoid conflict with him. Yuan Mei's evasion this time was very methodical. He traveled back and forth in the modern world and was always able to find a weak spot in Zhizhuang Daoren's Whaley and break through. Zhizhuang wasn't in a hurry. As long as no one interfered, even if he didn't use Creation Pauline's power, as long as the other party was still within the Whaley's range, he would be able to catch him sooner or later. Just like now, even though Yuan Mei could always find a weak spot, the two of them were getting closer and closer. When the other party couldn't even break through the Whaley's weak spot, it would be time for him to be caught. Yuan Mei gradually felt this predicament. At this moment, without external help, he was like walking in a net that was getting tighter and tighter. Sooner or later, he would lose the space to escape. However, as Wan Zhen, he didn't have any fear and only pursued the most beneficial side for himself. While he was trying to find a way, a thought appeared in his mind and pointed him to a way to escape. He didn't ask where the thought came from and he didn't have the desire to investigate further. He only knew that with the guidance of the thought, it was enough for him to escape from Zhizhuang's Whaley. Thus, his figure flickered and he fled to a certain modern world. He then suddenly escaped from the Zhizhuang's Whaley's ripples and disappeared. Zhizhuang Daoren was stunned when he sensed that Yuan Mei had disappeared from his range of perception. He released his mana ripples and instantly found a place where the essence of creation gathered. He couldn't help but exclaim, "A place of creation." Then, he frowned. At first glance, this place looked like a place of creation, but it didn't seem like it at all. If it was really such a place, then Yuan Mei might be able to obtain great benefits from it. For example, if this place didn't have a master and he became the master of this place, then he might be able to use this place to continue resisting. However, the appearance of this place was too much of a coincidence. Thinking back, Yuan Mei was clearly pushed to this step by an invisible hand. He sneered. No matter who was playing tricks, it all depended on strength. Now that he had the Creation Pauline in his hands, he didn't believe that he couldn't suppress this matter. Thus, he changed his mind and threw his Whaleys into the lake. Although Patriarch Yao Han didn't do anything, he had been paying attention to the movements outside. At this moment, when he saw this place that seemed to be a place of creation, he was moved. He walked out of the mirror lake and transmitted his thoughts to Zhang Yan, fellow Taoist Xianyuan. "Previously you and I made an agreement with fellow Taoist Zhizhuang. If we see a place of creation, then it will be my place of residence. Now that this place has appeared, I will go and take a look. I hope fellow Taoist will not stop me." Zhang Yan, as long as fellow Taoist does not interfere with the capture of Yuan Mei, I will not stop fellow Taoist. Patriarch Yao Han nodded, cupped his hands, and walked towards the place, disappearing in a flash. Zhang Yan glanced in that direction, but this time he didn't have any intention of going in to participate. Even if there was any external influence, Yao Han and Zhizhuang were enough to deal with it. There was no need for him to worry about this matter. He only separated a part of his thoughts to pay attention to the subsequent changes of the matter. Then, his mind returned to Bu Su Tian to continue expelling the strange force and comprehending the wondrous Tao. At the same time, he was also observing the changes of the Yen sect in the lower realm. Presently, there were over 10 places that had been transformed into the teaching inheritance grounds, and Gao Qingtu's place was the most flourishing amongst them. After it obtained the improved Tao art, it had become much stronger. If it continued according to this momentum, then it would take around another 100 years for these scattered energies to be completely expelled. In his opinion, this could already be considered to be right before his eyes. At that time, if his Taoist techniques could advance another level, then he would find a way to eliminate the strange force of great virtue. If he succeeded, then he could try to push open the door to the third stage. Since the establishment of the Yen sect, another 50 years had passed. The Yen sect had now moved to the original location of the Luo sect's main altar. However, after a few decades of continuous exploration, they found that the door of the two worlds was very different from what they had seen in the past. According to the movement of the heavens, the boundary that it went to was also different. Currently, there were 5 boundaries that had been discovered by the Yen sect's disciples. Among them, 3 were barren places with weak spiritual vigor, and 1 was in the void without a place to stay. Not long after, the disciples who went there lost contact with them. The last place was full of spiritual vigor, and it was suspected that there was a big cultivation sect there. Out of caution, no disciples had been sent there until now. In the main hall of the sect, Gao Qingtu sat at the top and taught the Taoist techniques to the hundreds of disciples below. After half a day, he stopped teaching and ordered the disciples to go back and comprehend. After the disciples bowed, they all left, except for a young man who still stayed. Gao Qingtu looked at the young man. This person's name was Tang Yu. In terms of talent, he was even above Shu Qing. However, Shu Qing's cultivation had not improved in the past 100 years. Whether he could achieve anything in the future would depend on his understanding of the Taoist techniques. Therefore, the beginning of the Yen sect depended on one's talent, and then it depended on one's Taoist heart. He said, "What else do you want?" Tang Yu said, "There is one thing that I don't understand. Why has the chief not gone to the place full of spiritual vigor?" Gao Qingtu said, "The place full of spiritual vigor does not have much benefit for me. On the contrary, it would be easy for me to clash with those big sections. When my Yen sect has enough strength, it won't be too late to visit there." He was from the mountain and sea realm, and his ancestors were from the 9 cities of Qinsang school. After traveling, he had a clear understanding of the strength of the various sections. How many years had it been since the Yen sect was at its weakest? It was the time when the Luo sect was at its weakest. With such little strength, not to mention competing with the big sects, even some of the small sects might not be able to win. For example, the Duliang sect did not even need Guancheng to do anything. As long as he sent a group of elders, they would not be able to resist. Therefore, it was better to make use of his strengths. First, preach in the places with weak spiritual vigor, and do his best to occupy the desolate world. Then, under the great waves of sand washing, there would eventually be outstanding people gradually emerging. And with each additional person, the strength of the Yen sect would increase. With sufficient strength, going to the place full of spiritual vigor was just now the right way. However, Tang Yu was not convinced. He said, "I heard that in the place full of spiritual vigor, I can find precious materials to refine weapons and elixirs. It is also of great use to me. I don't have to occupy every place, even just a place to stay is fine. If the chief is not willing, why don't you give me 100 people? I am willing to go to such a place." Gao Qingtu knew that his cultivation had stagnated, and he was anxious. Therefore, he turned his attention to other things. He wanted to borrow the help of external objects to see if he could improve his mana. Although the cultivation of the Yen sect did not require any external objects, in reality, some good elixirs would still have a certain effect on improving one's cultivation. However, it was absolutely impossible to break through the realm with these. He said, "The Tao of our sect lies in the comprehension of one's mind. There is no need to seek external help. Do not put the cart before the horse. There is no need to mention this again. Leave." Tang Yu could not help but feel a little sullen. However, when he returned to his residence, he found someone waiting for him. He said in surprise, "Protector Shu, why are you here?" Shu Qing said, "I know that you are thinking of ways to go to the place full of spiritual vigor. I can help you." Tang Yu's expression changed several times. Finally, with a hint of vigilance, he said, "I will not do something like betraying the sect." Although Shu Qing was a protector, the people in the sect knew that he was a disciple of the Duliang sect. Sooner or later, he would be separated from them. Therefore, they did not treat him as one of their own. Shu Qing said, betraying the sect. That is too serious. He said in a low voice, you must have heard that the disciples of the Duliang sect followed Master Gao here in order to find the mountain and sea realm. This realm is located in a place full of spiritual vigor. Therefore, the door to this place can only be found in this realm. However, Master Gao is wholeheartedly focused on the expansion of the sect. He has not gone to the place full of spiritual vigor. I am afraid that I will not be able to fulfill this wish until the end of my life. Therefore, I cannot wait any longer. If you want to go, I can take you with me. Tang Yu hesitated and said, the sect leader, Shu Qing said, I am now a protector. Within a year, I have the authority to open the door to heaven and earth. Why do you think the sect leader is willing to give me this opportunity? It is because he does not want to restrict us. He allows me to stay and go as I please. However, I see that your talent is extremely high, very similar to mine in the past. It is a pity that you are delayed here. If you go to the mountain and sea realm, you will be able to find the correct method. In the future, your achievements will be even greater. He stood up and walked away, saying, I will leave tomorrow. It is up to you whether you want to come or not. A day later, Gao Qingtu sensed that the door to heaven and earth had opened. He seemed to have expected it. He sat in the temple and did not move. He simply sighed. The people of the Duliang sect did not want to join the sect of evolution. They were considered to be outsiders here. It was only a matter of time before they left. However, he had promised to find a way to send them to the mountain and sea realm. Now that he could not do that, he felt a bit sorry for them. Since Tang Yu had a strong desire to go to another realm, and he was traveling with him, then he might as well let go of the reins and let him do as he pleased. That way, he could be considered to have fulfilled his promise on behalf of his master. Chapter 2173. After Yuan Ji entered the realm, he immediately felt that this was an ownerless land. He instinctively tried to refine this place according to the method that was most beneficial to him. Without a doubt, if he succeeded, it would not be difficult for him to protect himself, even if he did not counterattack. As long as he used the Weili, even if he could not become the master, he could still slightly hinder others from entering. With a thought, the Weili immediately expanded outwards. However, just as it was about to fill the entire land of creation, Jizhuang Daoren charged in, causing him to be unable to complete his task. Fortunately, at this point, he still had a choice, and that was to escape immediately. Faced with such a large land of creation, Jizhuang could not just abandon it. As long as he could delay the other person for a moment, he could once again break out of the trap of the Weili. However, just as he was about to abandon this place and escape, a strange consciousness arose in his heart. He instinctively wanted to suppress this consciousness, but at this moment, the Weili in this land of creation actually resonated with that consciousness, causing his mind to freeze. Meanwhile, at this time, it was actually the appearance of heavenly secrets. According to the method he cultivated, it should have been the original consciousness of Yuan Mo that hadn't been erased appearing, and then replacing it, returning to the original. At that time, he would have truly passed this trial. However, things did not develop this way. A mighty force that originally existed in his Dharmakaya emerged at this moment, spreading from a small to a wide area. Suddenly, it wiped away all traces that originally belonged to Yuan Mo, and in an instant, he became another person. At the same time, with the guidance of his mana, he actually mobilized the mighty force of this land of creation, firmly stopping Daoist Jizhuang's mighty force, preventing it from pressing forward at all. Jizhuang Daoren felt the resistance in front of him, and at the same time, he also noticed that the person fighting against him was no longer the original person, so he asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" At this moment, a vast Weili suddenly invaded from outside, and the Yao Han patriarch appeared. He looked around, and when he saw Yuan Ji, he was slightly surprised. He could clearly see that something was wrong. He then narrowed his eyes and said, "It's you." It was not difficult for him to identify who this person was based on his aura. Speaking of which, this person was somewhat related to him. Previously, in order to improve Yuan Ji's cultivation, he had taken out a creation treasure spirit's Whaley from the void and gave it to Yuan Ji as a resource. But looking at the current situation, not only did Yuan Ji not refine it as he had expected, but it instead turned the tables and replaced Yuan Ji. He thought for a moment and realized that every step he took seemed to be helping Yuan Ji awaken, but it was impossible for the other person to be able to control his thoughts. If he could really do such a thing, it meant that the level of the other party's power was much higher than his current level. If that was the case, there was no need for him to go around in such a roundabout way. He could just directly deal with him, so this could only be a coincidence. Ji Zhuang asked, Ji Zhuang, Taoist, you know who this person is? The Yao Han patriarch did not hide anything and told him the truth. Ji Zhuang's expression darkened. This meant that Yuan Ji was able to come here because of this person's guidance. If this person could activate the creation treasure spirit's Whaley, he must have left an incarnation of his will here long ago and became the master of this place. He thought for a moment. This was a huge variable, and it was better to eliminate it. Thus, he sent a message to the Yao Han patriarch, this person's origin is unknown, and he might be a hindrance to us. How about you join forces with me to eliminate him? However, the Yao Han patriarch did not reply, and no one knew what he was thinking. Ji Zhuang Daoren frowned. He knew that there was no hope in this matter. Instead, he was worried that the two of them would join forces against him, so he asked, how should I address you, Taoist? Yuan Ji replied with a smile, although I've recovered my divine sense, I'm still occupying Taoist Yuan Ji's body. It's better for you to call me Yuan Ji. Seeing that he was unwilling to reveal his name, Ji Zhuang Daoren did not pursue the matter. He only said, since you replaced Yuan Ji, you must know everything he knows. Right now, we need to maintain the heavenly order and sever our Tao. We cannot increase our cultivation at will, lest that person returns. Is Taoist willing? Yuan Ji smiled and said, don't worry, if that person returns, there will be no place for us. I understand this, and I won't do such a thing. Ji Zhuang Daoren raised creation Pauline and waved it in front of Yuan Ji. In an instant, a restraining force was released. Yuan Ji laughed and spread his arms, allowing Pauline's force to enter his body. Seeing this, Taoist Ji Zhuang didn't want to stay any longer. He bowed and left the land of fortune. After a while, he saw Ancestor Yao Han come out and said, if this person stays, there will be no end of trouble. If fellow Taoist had attacked with me, there would have been no need to worry. That way, we would have been able to take his land of fortune and fellow Taoist would have a place to stay. Ancestor Yao Han looked at him and said, if I can do it, why wouldn't I? Why don't Taoist calculate it? Hearing this, Ji Zhuang Daoren immediately calculated in his mind. After a while, his expression changed. He sighed, shook his head and said, originally there were only 3 players, but now there's one more. Fine, since everyone is competing to be first, then let's see who is first. Finished speaking, he waved his sleeves and returned to the mirror lake. Ancestor Yao Han looked at the lake for a while, then turned around and left as well. Although Zhang Yan was sitting in the sky, his consciousness was outside, so he saw what happened. He believed that the person who replaced Yuan Mei was not someone of great virtue, but compared to the current strength of Yao Han and Ji Zhuang, he was not much weaker. He should be someone who had walked on the unknown path of enlightenment for a long time. This person should be a creation treasure spirit. Treasure spirits were born with Whaley, but their state of mind was lacking, so it was not easy for them to reach the upper realm. However, this person was ordinary, but this did not mean that this matter was ordinary. Because everything that happened was too coincidental, he suspected that there was a higher level power involved. Logically speaking, Ji Zhuang and Yao Han should have joined forces to force this person into eternal silence, but they did not do anything. It was clear that they had no way to solve this matter. He snorted coldly. Actually, this matter did not jump out randomly, but there was a reason for it. When ancestor Yao Han was under pressure from Jizhuang Daoren, he was anxious to find his Weili, causing the two creation Pauline flowers to collide. Although he successfully found a part of his power, it also caused many things that did not originally exist in the void. He thought that since he could receive the thought transmission from the nameless great virtue, there might be other things that came out from a corner that he could not detect. Moreover, when the two Pauline flowers collided, Yuan Ji was the person involved, and his cultivation and magic power were the weakest. Maybe he was already unknowingly infected, and after a series of events, it finally led to this evil result. He raised his head to look at the void. From the thought transmitted by that almighty being, after spirit refinement cultivators entered the third stage, they would step onto a more difficult path of battle. As for what exactly was going on, it was still difficult for him to see it now, but it was not difficult to see some clues from Ji Zhuang, Yao Han, and now Yuan Ji. From the looks of it, he also had to speed up the progress of his cultivation. The matter of eliminating the strange power had to be resolved as soon as possible. Even if his methods were slightly more intense, it was better than being surpassed by others in the future. At the back of the mountain of the Yen sect's headquarters, more than 1,000 Yen sect disciples bowed to Gao Qingtu, who was standing on the high platform. Then, under the guidance of several disciples with profound Tao, they headed towards the door of two realms. Gao Qingtu looked at these disciples disappearing into the spiritual light screen one after another. His heart was filled with emotions, but he was also secretly worried. It had been 60 years since Shu Qing left with the Duyang sect's disciples. Now that the door of two realms had closed, most of the realms that could go to had become the Yen sect's dojo. Originally, all the door of two realms could only be exited and could not be returned. However, later on, a disciple accidentally discovered that as long as the door of two realms was opened at the same time, one could travel back. This discovery undoubtedly allowed the strength of the disciples of several realms to merge together, and the power of the Yen sect had also increased greatly. And now, only the last realm that was rich in spiritual vigor had yet to be taken into their hands. Therefore, the middle and lower level disciples, including many disciples with excellent aptitudes, all called out for disciples to be sent to this place to preach. As far as Gao Qingtu was concerned, he felt that the time was not ripe yet. Even though the Yen sect's disciples could be said to be countless, but the high-level strength was still lacking. If his magic power could advance to the next level, then it would be much more stable. In the past few decades, he had actually sent disciples to that place several times. Although they did not return with anything particularly noteworthy, he always felt that a place that was rich in spiritual vigor should not be that simple. As someone from the mountain and sea realm, he was very clear that there were many ways to change one's memories. However, it seemed that things had developed quite smoothly. Within a year, a lot of news came one after another from the two realms' dial, one of which was particularly important. It said that they had successfully found the door of two realms, and that they had also found the right time. They hoped that when the time came, the main sect would be able to open the door of two realms and bring the disciples back so that they could report in detail what had happened on the other side. The elder who received this news was extremely happy and immediately reported this matter, hoping that the sect leader would allow them to open the door of two realms. After hearing this, Gao Qingtu was about to agree, but just as he was about to do so, he felt an inexplicable uneasiness in his heart. He could not help but become vigilant. After a moment of consideration, he ordered, set up a few more layers of restrictions outside the door of two realms. When the door of two realms is opened, no disciples are allowed to approach. Although the elder did not understand, he still did as he was told. On the day the two sides agreed to meet, Gao Qingtu brought the highly skilled elders of the sect to the front of the gate and activated all the formations. Seeing that he looked as if he was about to face a great enemy, the elders of the sect also became somewhat serious. When the time came, the spiritual light screen above the door of two realms appeared. Not long after, a disciple walked out. One of the elders recognized the disciple, but before he could greet the disciple, an unfamiliar Taoist walked out. The Taoist took out an incantation and struck the disciple with a bolt of lightning. With a deafening sound, the disciple was instantly reduced to ashes. The elders were both shocked and angry. Just as they were about to activate the spell formations, Gao Qingtu stretched out his hand and stopped them. He asked in a low voice, "Who are you? Why did you kill a disciple of the Yen sect?" The Taoist withdrew his hand and looked around. Then he bowed toward the platform and said, "Anatta Temple, Yin Shang." Chapter 2174. Anatta Temple. Gao Qingtu's eyes flickered. If this was the Anatta Temple he knew, then the sect Yen was undoubtedly very close to the mountain and sea realm. That was good news. But in the heavens and realms, there were many Taoist sects, and there were many sects with the same name. Moreover, when this person reported his sect, the language he used was different from the 9 continents or even the mountain and sea realm. It was closer to the way he spoke. But even if it was true, it could be confirmed later. His own disciple had been killed in front of him, so he had to get to the bottom of it first. He said, "Why did you kill my disciple?" Yin Shang said, "Just now, that person has been infected by a demon, so he can no longer be considered a disciple of your sect." At this point, he was afraid that the people present did not understand what a demon was, so he explained a little more. Currently, the world occupied by the sect Yen had weak spiritual vigor, which was not enough to give birth to a demon, so most of the elders of the sect Yen had never seen such a thing. It seemed that what he said was not made up, so they were also dubious about it. Gao Qingtu knew about demons, and he also knew how dangerous they were. The 6 sects of the mountain and sea realm were responsible for suppressing demons, so it was not strange that such things existed in a place where spiritual vigor flourished. Before the door of the 2 realms opened, he had felt a little uneasy. Such a feeling would not appear out of thin air, so it might have come from a demon. One of the elders shouted, "How can you prove this?" Yin Shang said, "That demon has been destroyed by my lightning technique, and all the impure Yin Qi has been swept away. I'm afraid there is no way to prove it." The elder moved closer to Gao Qingtu and said, "Sect leader, this person is just talking nonsense. It is hard for us to believe him. Why don't we capture him first?" Gao Qingtu shook his head and said, "There is no need for that." He said to Yin Shang, "Since you claim to be a disciple of the Anatta Temple, then you must have a talisman to prove your background. Can I take a look at it?" Yin Shang looked at Gao Qingtu in surprise. He did not expect that someone would know about such a thing in a place where spiritual vigor was so weak. To be honest, after coming here, he didn't think much of the people here. Otherwise, he would have at least explained the situation first instead of recklessly attacking first. However, he believed that there was no problem in dealing with this. Things like devils, if they weren't careful, they could rush into the bodies of other living beings. There was nothing wrong with exterminating them in time. He reached into his sleeve and produced a talisman, which he waved in front of him. Gao Qingtu took a look at it. The words, Huanjin Temple, were written in the language of the 9 continents. There was also a surname engraved on the corner. Without a doubt, he could confirm the identity of the person. He pondered for a while and waved his hand to open the prohibition. He said, "All of you guard the array here. I will go in and talk to him." All the elders were a little nervous. "Headmaster," Gao Qingtu said, "I know what I'm doing." He walked into the formation and arrived in front of the disciple from Huanjin Temple. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Taoist friend. I am the chief of Yen sect, Gao Qingtu." Yin Shang returned the greeting and said, "So it is sect leader Gao." Gao Qingtu said, "Fellow Taoist, you claim to be a disciple of Huanjin Temple. Is there a branch of Huanjin Temple in the other world?" Yin Shang looked at him and asked curiously, "Headmaster Gao, have you had dealings with fellow Taoists of Huanjin Temple in the past?" Gao Qingtu didn't say that he was from the mountain and sea realm. As the chief of a sect, he couldn't easily reveal his background. He just said, "Although I have never met you, fellow Taoist from Huanjin Temple, I have had dealings with several fellow Taoists of the mountain and sea realm in the past. I have heard of your sect's name." Yin Shang suddenly understood. He didn't suspect anything. Although Taoist magic had been severed, there were still many sects in the mountain and sea realm that continued to expand. It wasn't strange that Gao Qingtu had run into a few of them. Gao Qingtu said, I would like to ask you about something. What is the situation in the other world? Yin Shang said, because of the devils wreaking havoc in this world, most of the Taoist cultivators have died. When the elders of my temple heard that devils were wreaking havoc in the world, they led us there to slay them. Gao Qingtu asked, I once sent over 1,000 disciples to the other side. Did you see them? Yin Shang shook his head and said, devils feed on human desires. They will often attack those close to the host. When my Huanjin temple attacked the other world, almost everyone there was possessed by devils. Although he did not continue speaking, Gao Qingtu understood what he meant. He also sighed and said, have all the demons in the other world been annihilated by your sect? Yin Shang said confidently, I can't say all of them have been wiped out, but there shouldn't be any left on the surface. It's just that as long as the turbid Yin spiritual opportunity exists, these devils won't disappear. They will still appear in the future. Gao Qingtu thought about it. Although the members of Huanjin sect had their strengths in Taoist magic cultivation, they usually fought with magic power. They were very lacking in divine Taoist magic techniques. The way to use them was something they figured out on their own. It was fine if they were facing Taoist cultivators, but if they encountered devils, they might not have any way to restrain them. Although his cultivation was higher than the rest of the members, he also didn't have the ability to do so. Now that he knew about this, he must find a way to restrain them. He said, it's rare for Taoist Yin to come here. Can you stay for a few more days? I have many questions to ask. Yin Shang said, I don't dare. Then I'll have to bother your sect. In the next half a month, Gao Qingtu entertained Yin Shang well and asked him some questions from time to time. Yin Shang answered all the questions that could be answered. Gao Qingtu once asked if the method to restrain the devils could be shared. Yin Shang said that it was a secret technique of Huanjin Temple and couldn't be shared. Therefore, Gao Qingtu didn't mention it again. However, it wasn't for nothing. From Yin Shang, Gao Qingtu at least learned which doors to return to the mountain and sea realm. A few days later, Gao Qingtu sent Yin Shang away and found the elders of the sect to discuss how to deal with the devils. Elder Daoran said, isn't Huanjin Temple a sect that specializes in killing devils? Why don't we invite them to come here and establish a branch sect? Before he could finish his words, he was fiercely opposed by the other elders. They said, how can we allow outsiders to stay in the land of Yanjiao? Gao Qingtu also didn't agree. He said, there will be many enemies in the future. Devils aren't the only kind. How can we rely on others for everything? The elders spoke one after another and came up with many ideas. However, they couldn't solve the root of the problem. Seeing this, Gao Qingtu dismissed everyone and came to the place where the ancestral tablets were enshrined. He bowed to the table and told them about the predicament they were in. However, he didn't get any response. He couldn't help but sigh. It seemed that he could only think of a solution himself. However, just as he was about to leave, he saw a spiritual light descending from above. A diagram appeared out of nowhere in the hall. Countless stars were swaying on it. This is, for no reason, he felt that one of the stars should be the heaven realm where he was, and the others should be the places where the other Yanjiao sects existed. Among them, the bright ones should be the places where the spiritual vigor was flourishing, while the dim ones were undoubtedly the places where the spiritual vigor was weak. He couldn't help but be moved. Since the followers of Yanjiao could survive in such a place where the spiritual vigor was flourishing, they might have the ability to fight against the devils. There was no hope for him to ask for the secret technique of restraining the devils from other sections. However, if both of them practiced the same method, it would undoubtedly be much easier to communicate. He instantly understood that the sect ancestor wanted him to look for the Yanjiao sect in the other territories, so he bowed towards the memorial tablet and said, "Thank you for your guidance, sect ancestor. Disciple knows what I should do." Zhang Yan allowed Yanjiao to expand in the lower realms while he continued to eliminate the deviant forces. Soon, a few years had passed. Those deviant forces that could be dealt with were almost completely wiped out by him. What was left were those deviant forces of great virtue. These Weili were very difficult to eliminate. He had calculated earlier that due to a certain obstacle, it would be useless even if he moved everyone out of Busushin and turned Busushin into chaos. He once thought that if he really couldn't do it, then he would call the Whaley from other places of creation over and suppress them. Even if it was only for a moment, he could take advantage of this gap to peep into the true truth of the great Tao contained in Busushin. But now that he had really reached this step, he realized that he might not really need to do so. Instead, he could try to circumvent it. With the improvement of the method, he gradually discovered some things that he hadn't discovered before. He used to think that Jizhuang Daoren was able to cut off the method because the power of the creation Pauline directly invaded Busushin. But now it seemed that it wasn't the case. It should have bypassed the Busushin Whaley and directly landed on the living creatures. It was no wonder that Busushin Whaley had no reaction to this. It wasn't that Busushin was weaker, but that the two forces had never truly intersected. But in fact, the power of the creation Pauline could collide with the creation Whaley. In fact, here, it was actually Jizhuang Daoren who consciously caused this power to produce such a change. Therefore, he believed that the key here was the word, use. If he continued to comprehend in this way and didn't try to make some kind of change, he might never be able to touch the true essence. If he wanted to make the Busushin Whaley be used by him, he had to make this Whaley change under his consciousness. He didn't have to take the initiative to adapt to this kind of power. With this thought, it was as if another door had opened in front of him. Of course, this was because he had first combined the power of the yin and yang sides of Busutian. Then, he gradually expelled the foreign force so that his own Fa Li and Busutian's mighty power were in perfect harmony. That was how he was able to reach this point. Before this, it would have been impossible even if he had thought of it. With a direction to go, he immediately tried, but he soon encountered obstacles. If it was just using the Busushin Whaley, it could be done with a thought. But it was not easy to make this power change according to his wishes. Every time he tried, he felt extremely sluggish, as if he was fighting against it. Making the Busushin Whaley be used by him was in fact cutting off all the side branches and directly using his own will to create the results he wanted. With the power of the spirit refining technique, everything could be molded at will, but in the face of a higher level of power like Busushin, it was obviously not so easy. If one day he could completely change the Busushin Whaley with his will, it would mean that he had succeeded. As for now, he had only stirred up a corner of it. But as a master, once this gap was opened, he could continue to expand the results. In the future, he only needed to continue working in this direction. Chapter 2175. Somewhere in the heaven realm, Shu Qing stepped onto an altar alone. After greeting the Taoist guard, he chatted with him for a while. After understanding the situation, he walked down from the altar and said to his fellow disciples who were waiting below, "I've already come to an agreement with the guard here. In 3 days, the spirit tide will arrive. At that time, he will open the realm pass and send us over." Someone asked, "Senior brother, is the mountain and sea realm over there?" Shu Qing said, "That's what the guard said. He's a disciple of one of the big sects here, so there's no need for him to deceive us. Fellow disciples, you can find a place to rest first. In 3 days, we'll see for ourselves." Everyone obeyed and dispersed. Shu Qing let out a sigh of relief. After 100 years of searching, it looked like the journey was finally coming to an end. Because the area where Yan Jiao was originally located was within the 4 major constellations, he had inquired incessantly along the way. Not long ago, he had finally found the correct path. However, it wasn't that he didn't encounter danger along the way. Of the dozens of Duliang sect disciples who had traveled with him, there were only 11 people left, including him. As for Tang Yu, he had also suffered heavy losses. There were only 20 or so disciples left. What he didn't know was that their group was actually quite lucky. After leaving the Yankio sect realm, they had been in a hurry to find the mountain and sea realm. As soon as they found the gateway between the 2 realms, they had passed through it without encountering any gargoyles. Otherwise, they would have been completely wiped out. They waited for 3 days, and when the spirit tide arrived, Shu Qing led them to the altar. The Taoist guard opened the gate and let them pass. When Shu Qing arrived, he found that he was standing on an altar that was very similar to the one in front of him. There was also a Taoist guard here. He quickly cupped his hands and bowed. At this time, a Du-Yang sect disciple came up and asked, "Senior brother, is this the mountain and sea realm?" The Taoist guard laughed and said, "This is not the mountain and sea realm, but the lower realm of the mountain and sea realm. If you want to go to the mountain and sea realm, I'm afraid you'll have to wait for a few more months." When Shu Qing heard that it was not the mountain and sea realm, he was slightly disappointed. However, he finally had some clear information. He asked, "May I ask why we have to wait? Is it because you need to accumulate spiritual opportunity?" The Taoist who guarded the altar shook his head and said, "That's not the case. It's because there's too much spiritual opportunity, which attracted the invasion of the ferocious beasts from beyond the heavens. It's not a good time to open the realm gate now. Fortunately, the upper realm has already sent their mighty people to kill these ferocious beasts. The battle has been going on for years, but it seems like it's coming to an end now." Someone asked doubtfully, "Monsters from outer space?" The altar keeper smiled and pointed, "Look over there." Everyone looked back and saw a shadow lying on the ground. At first, they thought it was a mountain range in the sky, but when they looked closely, they realized it was a giant beast. Just the horns on its body pierced the sky, and in different directions, they could vaguely see other similar things. It was the first time they had seen such a scene, and they couldn't help but be shocked. Someone murmured, "Is that the ferocious beasts from outer space?" The Taoist who guarded the altar said lightly, "These are just a few small pawns that were beaten down. The leader of the ferocious beasts is still outside the heaven realm. If no one stops it, it can swallow the spiritual opportunity of an entire realm. Those who are not skilled enough won't be able to see it." Shu Qing asked in a low voice, "May I ask how many of these things are there?" The Taoist who guarded the altar said, "It can't be calculated based on how many there are. If the heaven realm is full of spiritual opportunity, then these things will be endless. But if the spiritual opportunity is not, then it won't come even if you summon it." Shu Qing was slightly relieved. He was extremely afraid that Du-Yang's sect would encounter such things. Just the small pawns of the ferocious beasts lying on the ground were enough to make him tremble with fear, let alone the leader of the ferocious beasts that couldn't be seen at all. Because they couldn't leave for the time being, they set up camp near the altar. Occasionally, the corpses of the ferocious beasts would fall from the sky. Although they couldn't see anything, it wasn't hard to imagine that a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering battle was taking place there. Shu Qing was deeply shocked in his heart as well, and he couldn't help but arouse doubt in his heart. Even if I find that technique one day and bring it back to the sect, would I really be able to cultivate it to the point of being able to resist the ferocious beasts from beyond the heavens? Then he thought about it. There were many Taoist magics in the mountain and sea realm. If this method didn't work, then he would have to find another one. They waited for about half a year, and one day, the Taoist who guarded the altar came to inform them that the ferocious beasts had all been killed, and they could leave. Hearing this, everyone was overjoyed. The 100-year journey had finally come to an end. Therefore, they followed Shu Qing through the realm gate with apprehension in their hearts, and stepped onto the path to the end. Yuan Jin sat cross-legged in the land of good fortune. Under his Weili's control, countless living beings were born from the various worlds in the heavens, and then rapidly multiplied and changed. At this moment, in his consciousness, there was a vague image of a lotus. Ji Zhuang and Yao Han had sensed the existence of this thing, and felt that they couldn't take it down, which was why they had retreated. However, this land of good fortune had been entrusted to him by the Weili who had helped him return. Right now, he could only use it, and couldn't be considered Pauline's master. That made him feel a bit uneasy. If the Weili could give him this thing, then he could take it away at any time. Without it, he would instantly return to his original state. His land of good fortune couldn't compare to Bushutian's, and he couldn't rely on it to protect himself. Therefore, he could only think of a way to enter the third stage as soon as possible. That way, he wouldn't have to fear anyone. After replacing Yuan Jin, he had already turned his power into his own, and his cultivation had also recovered to the original second stage. However, he had returned in a hurry after all. His body was fragmented and lacking in many areas. Thus, he had been trying to heal himself. Once his cultivation had stabilized, he could use the lotus as a means of sustenance and attempt to ascend to the third level. However, if he really succeeded in doing so, it seemed like it would also cause that existence to annihilate everything. But this had nothing to do with him. At that time, he would be no less powerful than the other. Even if everything was destroyed, what could they do to him? Although he had promised Ji Zhuang not to increase his cultivation, and even allowed him to use Pauline's power to suppress himself, to him, who also had Pauline, it was just for show. He had never really carried out this promise. There had never been any contract between cultivators. Even if he broke his promise, what could Ji Zhuang do to him? In fact, even people like Yao Han and Ji Zhuang, even if they were prepared to break their promise, they still had some face. They wouldn't take this kind of thing for granted. As long as they had a choice, they would try their best to keep their promise. But as a treasure spirit, he didn't care about these superficial things. What he was worried about now was that if he tried to increase his cultivation, Yao Han and Ji Zhuang would definitely stop him. Therefore, it was best to find an ally to advance and retreat with him. He thought for a while, then transformed into a doppelganger and left the land of good fortune. Guided by his thoughts, he came before Bushutian. He smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "Is fellow Taoist here?" Zhang Yan had already sensed his arrival in Bushutian. With a thought, he transformed into a doppelganger and bowed, saying, "What brings you here?" Yuan Mei had a smile on his face, saying, "Nothing for him, just for the benefit of you and me." Zhang Yan looked at him and smiled, saying, "What benefit is there between you and me?" Yuan Mei opened his hands and said in a slightly exaggerated manner, "How can there be no benefit? Fellow Taoist and I are both pursuing the great Tao. But now there are two blocking in front of us, making it hard for us to surpass. Since there is a common enemy, then there is a common benefit to be found." Zhang Yan said, "You're wrong. You and I are not the same. You and Ji Zhuang have made a promise long ago. You are not allowed to increase your cultivation recklessly. As for me, I have cut off my karma with that existence. I cultivate my own martial arts. It has nothing to do with you and the other two." Yuan Mei smiled soundlessly, saying, "But will those two really watch fellow Taoist achieve success?" He said unhurriedly, "Fellow Taoist has cultivated to this stage, so you must be like me, able to sense it. If you go to the upper realm, I'm afraid you won't allow those two to recover their original Weili. Even if fellow Taoist has never thought about it, as long as you have the ability, those two won't let fellow Taoist pass so easily." Zhang Yan smiled faintly, saying, "Then it seems fellow Taoist also has this thought." Yuan Mei laughed and waved his sleeve, saying, "I do have this thought. If I succeed, there will naturally be one less opponent, fellow Taoist will not be an exception. But this is something to consider in the future. Before I succeed, fellow Taoist and I are not enemies." Zhang Yan did not comment on this. Didn't Ji Zhuang and Yao Han want to stop him? Of course they wanted to, it was just that they couldn't do it. Even if the two of them put aside their prejudice and joined forces, they still wouldn't be able to defeat Bushutian. Moreover, the two of them were restraining each other. If they could join forces, they would have done so long ago instead of waiting until now. On the other hand, Yuan Mei's origin was unknown, making him more vulnerable to the two of them. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in such a hurry to find an ally. At this moment, he was only thinking about his own cultivation and didn't have the mood to care about others. Thus, he said indifferently, "Don't worry, fellow Taoist, I won't join forces with Yao Han and Ji Zhuang to attack you." These words were clearly a form of rejection. Yuan Mei's gaze sharpened, but it was only for a moment before he returned to his original smiling appearance. He said, "It seems that fellow cultivator doesn't want to join forces with me. Forget it, there is no point in forcing things, there is no point in forcing things. Then I'll take my leave." He clasped his hands at Zhang Yan and left. Zhang Yan's consciousness turned and returned to his body. His eyes were deep. Yuan Mei's origin was indeed not simple. The things he revealed were not something a spirit refinement cultivator in the second realm could know. There must be a higher power behind him. Through this person's words, he was even more certain that after a spirit refinement cultivator entered the third realm, all of the same generation would be opponents. This was most likely a completely different situation from the original fusion of mana and comprehension of the Great Tao. However, there should still be room for coexistence here. Perhaps no one could truly defeat their opponent, so they had to compromise. Otherwise, the Vedanta would have already killed each other until there was no one left. His cultivation had not reached this step yet, so there was no need to think too much. Thus, he calmed his mind and continued to pry open Bushutian's Weili bit by bit so that he could use it as soon as possible. Chapter 2176. Shu Qing and the others passed through the realm gate, and the first place they arrived was the eastern wastelands. By now, the Taoist magics of this place were the most complicated. Not only were there Taoist magics from various sects and clans of the mountain and sea realm, there were also Taoist magics from other heavens. Everyone had traveled here for 6 years and witnessed many divine abilities, greatly broadening their horizons. However, at the same time, their mental states had also undergone changes. Some disciples felt that even though there wasn't any threshold to cultivate the Tao art of Yen teaching, and it didn't require any external objects, it similarly didn't have any extraordinary means. Especially after witnessing the battle between the same generation and the variant species, they felt that this Tao art was too weak compared to other Tao arts. What caught their attention the most here was the art of external alchemy, which could harvest the blood of demons and other species for their own use. Hence, they suggested to Shu Qing that there was no need to look for the art of teaching Yen anymore. Instead, it was better to bring the rest of the Tao techniques that they had learned back to the sect. After Shu Qing heard this, he silently agreed to this. Actually, he understood as well that it wasn't just the problem of the Tao analysis lacking divine abilities, but it was the cultivation of their group that hadn't improved for a long time. Having cultivated to such an extent, they'd all encountered an obstacle in their hearts, and even if they found the correct method, they would probably be unable to advance any further if they didn't resolve this matter. Now, since there were so many Tao techniques before them, then why should they continue on this path until their deaths? With Shu Qing's permission, the disciples of Dou Liang's sect started to learn other methods. Even though they didn't give up on Tao methods, they often belittled them to prove that they were right. This practice made many of the disciples of Yen teaching feel very angry. Someone immediately reported it to Tang Yu. Tang Yu said very indifferently, "They're people of Du Liang's sect and not disciples of Yen's sect. If they want to change their cultivation method, then let them. What has it got to do with me? If you can't stand their actions, you can draw a clear line between yourself and them in the future." A disciple said in a low voice, "Senior Martial Brother, after those people from Liang's sect learned those Tao arts, they indeed have many more battle techniques. If we also..." Tang Yu snorted and said in disdain, "The Tao art of my sect Yen doesn't rely on external objects or spiritual opportunity. Among all the Tao arts that we've seen later on, which one of them can do that? It wasn't that they didn't want to, it was that they couldn't. Moreover, along the way, have we seen such complicated Tao arts anywhere else?" Everyone shook their heads. Tang Yu said, "That's it." He slightly raised his head, and his voice carried a trace of pride. "Whereas my sect ancestor was able to pass down the Tao to the myriad of worlds in the universe, and it's sufficient to show the might of the sect ancestor's divine ability. The people of the great Liang sect abandoned the grand Tao and went to search for the minor Tao instead. These are only some short-sighted people, yet I'm ashamed to be associated with them." A disciple asked, "Then what should I do later?" Tang Yu said matter-of-factly, "Of course we'll go our separate ways. They'll go find their small Tao, we'll go find our big Tao." In the past, Gao Qingtu had told some of his disciples that he had come from the state of Sea Victor in the mountain and sea realm, where a legacy stone stele had fallen into the mountain and sea realm. Therefore, a few days later, Tang Yu parted ways with Shu Qing and the others, leading his fellow Yanjiao disciples south. After Zhang Yan sat in meditation for a long time, he was able to change more and more Weili. During this period of time, he tried to expel the strange power of the great virtue. The great virtue Weili was not the great virtue itself, and they weren't one. Bush Tian was at least at the same level, so logically speaking, it should be possible. However, he soon found that although he could expel the strange power, he couldn't cut it off from Bush Tian. Instead, it retreated toward the Bush Tian Weili that he hadn't yet controlled. Therefore, he returned to the original point. If he wanted to completely expel it, he could only use all of the Bush Tian Weili. However, at that time, it wouldn't matter if he could expel the strange power or not. Since he couldn't achieve this, he would just have to change it. He had thought that since Ji Zhuang could use the power of Fortune Pauline to avoid the Bush Tian Weili and land on the creatures in the inner realm, could he also use the Bush Tian Weili that he could control to do the same? This was undoubtedly worth a try. It would help him better understand the changes in the Weili. However, right now he needed to find a target. Ji Zhuang and Yao Han were both hiding in the Mirror Lake, and both of them had the Lotus of Good Fortune in their hands. Thus, it was not appropriate for this power to land in the Mirror Lake. It was very likely that they would discover it the moment it came up. Thus, he decided to land the mighty power in the land of good fortune behind Yuan Mo. Ji Zhuang and Yao Han had retreated last time, so it was obvious that Yuan Mo had some method. However, Yuan Mo was a treasure spirit, so his aura was a bit messy, making it very suitable for him to attack. Once he made up his mind, a portion of Bushutian's mighty force that he could control gradually changed under his will. Then, it landed on Yuan Gui's land of fortune. Logically speaking, when the mighty powers from different places of fortune landed in one place, they would definitely collide. Even though they came from the same source, they were already independent existences. However, this time, these mighty powers easily seeped into the place of fortune. They did not encounter any obstructions during this process, as if they were completely unrelated to each other. Yuan Mo was originally meditating, but he felt that something was wrong. Although he had the protection of Pauline, the item did not belong to him, and he could not normally carry it by his side. He could only summon it when he had to use it. Zhang Yan did not target him this time. He was only trying to see if the Weili could invade, so he did not even have any warning signs. However, out of caution, he still tried a few times. After finding no results, he frowned and gave up. Zhang Yan controlled the Weili and wandered around the land of fortune. Soon, everything was clearly seen by him. However, spirit refinement cultivators could change their own territories at any time, so there was not much value. However, there was one thing that caught his attention. Among the worlds created by Yuan Mo's magic power, many similar Daos had been spread, and a sect had been established. It was clear that he had not neglected to preach. He pondered for a moment. Since Jizhuang Daoren could use Creation Pauline to sever the Daos and suppress his peers, then he might be able to do the same with the transformed Bush Tian Weili. It might be difficult to suppress his peers, but it was much easier to deal with ordinary living beings. He turned the Bush Tian Weili around, but he had invisibly placed a shackle on all living beings. If these living beings wanted to cultivate, they would have to put in more effort than before, and this shackle would be passed down from generation to generation until the end of the world, unless there was a mighty figure who could expel the remaining Weili. Yuan Mo might feel that something was wrong, but he would definitely not investigate it. This was because he was like Ji Zhuang, Yao Han, and the others. He only preached Daos for a certain purpose, but he would not worry too much about ordinary living beings. Usually, he would let them develop on their own, and if it really did not work, he would just start all over again. He would not look for the specific reason. After trying it out, Zhang Yan confirmed that the Bush Tian Weili that he had modified could indeed be used by him, so he retracted his consciousness. However, he could not help but think about the matter of preaching Daos. He felt that although he had guessed some things in the past, it was very likely that he had only seen part of it and not the whole thing. Yuan Mo was only at the second stage, but he could not wait to do this. Moreover, he did it as soon as he entered this land of fortune. Perhaps this had something to do with advancing to the third stage. If one were to say that these living beings who had received the teachings could decide the cultivation of a spirit refinement cultivator, he would definitely not believe it. Due to their own cultivation level, it was impossible for them to influence the upper realm cultivators, unless it was, he thought for a moment and felt that he needed to confirm it again. Thus, he tried to sense the consciousness of the Almighty Being who had sent him the message. This time, under his control, the consciousness of the Almighty Being gradually gathered and turned into the figure of a Taoist who sat opposite him. The consciousness of these Almighty Beings were originally fragmented and messy, and the things he could receive were also limited. He could only rely on what he knew and saw to make deductions. However, after knowing how to use the Bush Tian Weili, he could organize and gather them. In reality, these consciousnesses were the transmission of the great virtue itself. If he could gather all the consciousnesses in one place, then he would be able to see the body of the master of the consciousnesses. However, this was impossible. Because his level was not high enough compared to the great virtue, he was destined to be unable to see everything. He could only gather the consciousnesses by relying on the Bush Tian Weili. The great virtue might have done this to avoid something, so it was not complete. The figure of the Taoist opened his mouth and said, "Fellow Taoist, why did you call me out?" Zhang Yan cupped his hands and asked a few questions. The Taoist also answered them one by one, but his answers were vague. Either he had already deduced it, or he was ambiguous and could not be sure. In the end, he asked that question, "Fellow Taoists, what is the use of preaching to me in the present world?" The Taoist actually fell silent. After a long time, he replied, "There is a path, and I am not the only one who exists." A light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. Although the other party did not give the real answer, combined with his previous deductions, he had more or less guessed the reason. He waved his sleeve, and the figure of the Taoist suddenly disappeared. He came out of meditation and looked down at the lower realm. It seemed that preaching to the world was very important, and what he had done in the past was undoubtedly correct. Moreover, this answer also allowed him to know where the Tao technique he had passed down was missing. In the past, the Tao technique of Yen teaching could be said to be incomplete, but this was also relatively speaking. If one did not lack talent and Tao heart, it was possible to cultivate to the mortal transformation level with this Tao technique, but it would not be able to reach the true Yang realm. However, without the help of the mysterious stone, even if the Tao technique could pass this stage, it would still be unable to reach this realm. Therefore, the difference here was almost negligible. This time, he knew where the loophole was. Although this Tao technique could not be completed due to the limitations of cultivation, it could be improved slightly. He pointed with his finger, and a ray of spiritual light descended and headed down to the lower realm. Chapter 2177. Half a year later, Tang Yu and his group arrived at Haishan country. Haishan country was the largest country in the south of the eastern wilderness due to the large number of cultivators. Tang Yu and his group originally came to observe the technique inheritance stone tablet, but only when they arrived did they find out that the stone tablet was hidden in the national mountain of Haishan country. Usually, only a few people were qualified to go and comprehend it. Apart from that, young people in the country could also go and have a look when they entered the Tao, but they had to be disciples of a big family. Ordinary people did not have this opportunity, and could only practice the Tao that was passed on. Tang Yu told the people of Haishan country that he was Gao Qingtu's disciple, and asked if he could make an exception. However, most of Gao Qingtu's old friends had passed away, so the proposal was rejected by the upper echelons of Haishan country. When Tang Yu saw this, he also felt embarrassed. Fortunately, the country did not prohibit the exchange of Tao techniques. Moreover, after Gao Qingtu, the people of Haishan country started to travel. Many of them were knowledgeable. Sitting and discussing Tao with these people, Tang Yu and the other disciples of Yanjiao were often enlightened. Everyone stayed here for 3 years. In the beginning, their desire to seek the correct Dharma lingered. However, after a long time, they gradually threw this matter to the back of their minds. Moreover, the obstacles that were originally in their hearts loosened because of this, and all of their cultivation unexpectedly improved. Only now did Tang Yu understand the meaning behind the words that Gao Qingtu had said to him that day. Even though Tao was important, but if one's perspective was too small and blindly attributed everything to Tao, and even took this as the correct principle, then one would be restricting oneself instead. With this understanding, he finally stopped being obsessed with it, and no longer blindly rejected other Tao. Instead, he often used it as a reference to broaden his experience and broaden his knowledge. Every time, he would be enlightened. At the same time, he also brought a few of his fellow disciples to travel elsewhere. After another 5 years, he received an unexpected piece of news. "Senior brother, I heard that it's not only the Hai Shing nation that has a skill-imparting stone tablet. There's also a skill-imparting stone tablet that has fallen from the extreme west of the Western Absolute Domain. That stone tablet was born intact, but no one can move it away." After Tang Yu confirmed that this news was true, he was also moved. Although he had long let go of his obsession, as a disciple of the Yen sect, he had never truly seen his own technique inheritance stone tablet. This could not be said to be a pity. He said to the rest of his fellow disciples, "We came here to seek the correct method." Later on, we found out that the so-called correct method is in the heart. However, coming here to take a look at the tablet was my original goal. If I could see it, then my wish would be fulfilled. Many of his fellow disciples expressed their agreement. Everyone discussed and decided to make a trip to the Western Desolate Domain. After making some preparations, they set off on the second day. Due to the long journey, even with the teleportation formation, it took them more than 2 years to arrive at the Western Desolate Domain. After that, they took the flying boat and flew for more than a year. Just now, they had arrived at the extreme west. Only when they arrived here did they notice that it wasn't just them who'd gone to observe the technique inheritance stone steel all along the way, and there were many other cultivators as well. Moreover, there were quite a few of them, and all of them had rushed over after hearing the news. However, they encountered trouble when they arrived at the boundary. They were told that the area ahead was already occupied by a few heavenly ghost tribes, and they couldn't pass through. Previously, there were people who didn't believe it and tried to fly over in vain. However, they were either attacked by the ferocious demonic birds that occupied the sky, or captured by the heavenly ghost tribes. A cultivator asked curiously, "The Western Desolate Domain is the Shaoqing sect's territory, and there are many subsects here. Why would they allow such a large heavenly ghost tribe to exist here?" A cultivator who knew about the situation explained, "I heard that the Shaoqing sect had slaughtered too much previously, and almost all the demons in the Western Desolate Domain were killed. It's hard for their disciples to find an opponent when they go out, so they intentionally let the heavenly ghost tribes that rose up later on run, so that they can use them to sharpen their swords in the future." Someone else said worriedly, "But if that's the case, we can't go over either. How are we going to observe the technique inheritance stone steel?" Everyone discussed about it. Some suggested that they work together to kill their way through, while some felt that it was safer to wait for the Shaoqing sect's disciples to come and follow them, while more people wanted to retreat. A disciple of the Yen sect came to Tang Yu's side and said, "Senior brother, should we wait here or go over first?" Tang Yu thought about it for a moment. If he were alone, he would have just gone over. But with so many fellow disciples, he couldn't disregard their lives. Looking around, he said cautiously, "Let's wait here for a bit. I thought that there would be quite a few fellow Taoists who wanted to observe the true method rushing over. Once we've gathered enough people, we can go together." Although there were many people here, he could tell that many of them were just people who had no hope of cultivating their own method, so they came to try their luck. Only a few people were like them, who had learned the Yen sect's method in the past and came here to seek the true method. After the disciples of the Yen sect let go of their stubbornness, their mental state had improved a lot. Although they could achieve their goal by passing this obstacle, they didn't feel anxious at all. They set up camp here according to Tang Yu's instructions. During this period, many people were unwilling to wait and forcefully flew over, but it was unknown if they succeeded or not. As they waited patiently, more and more people gathered here, and soon there were more than 10,000 people. There were cultivators from the mountain and sea realm, and there were also cultivators from other realms. However, there weren't many people with profound cultivation, so they still didn't make a move. One night, Tang Yu was meditating when his heart suddenly jumped. He immediately went out of his residence and looked up into the sky. He saw streaks of sword light flying through the sky, heading straight in the direction of the heavenly ghost tribe. Someone shouted excitedly, "It's the minor clear sword escape." It must be the minor clear disciples who came to the heavenly ghost tribe to test their swords. When Tang Yu heard that, he immediately gathered his fellow disciples and said, "The heavenly ghost tribe won't let the minor clear disciples kill them for nothing. They will definitely try to avoid it, or send out the great figures of the tribe to fight with them. They won't have time to care about other things right now. When the opportunity comes, we'll make a move now. We should be able to pass through." After giving his instructions, he flew into the sky and headed in the direction of the sword light. The people of the Yen sect followed behind him. He wasn't the only one who could see this. Streaks of light flew up one after another, and the others followed suit. It was quite a big commotion for a while. Just as Tang Yu expected, the heavenly ghost tribe retreated in order to avoid the minor clear disciples. They didn't have the mind to stop the others, so they had a smooth journey. After flying for half a night, they left the territory of the heavenly ghost tribe. They didn't stop because of this, and continued flying forward. When dawn arrived, a large tablet suddenly appeared in front of them. It was as large as a mountain, reaching straight into the clouds. The sun rose behind it, and golden light shone from it. The tablet shone brilliantly. Such a scene shocked everyone. Tang Yu slowed down and landed in front of the stone tablet. The tablet was clearly smooth, but when he looked at it, the eroded runes were reflected in his mind. He took a deep breath and sat down cross-legged, entering a meditative state. The fellow disciples of the Yen sect also involuntarily sat down around him. It was extremely dangerous to do so without any protection, but it wasn't just them. Everyone who saw the stone tablet was the same. They seemed to have entered the most focused state of mind to seek Tao in an instant. Dozens of days later, Tang Yu woke up from his meditative state. He found that what he had learned was mostly the same as what Gao Qingtu had told him. However, everyone had a different understanding of the eroded runes. So what he had learned in the past was Gao Qingtu's Tao, and not his own Tao. When he truly saw it, he had his own understanding. It could be said that he had verified what he had learned with this, and gained a deeper understanding of many areas. That wasn't all he saw this time. He saw that apart from the original Tao technique, there was also a secret technique recorded on it. He didn't know if it was originally there, or if it was added later. With this secret technique, one could deduce various divine abilities and Tao techniques. The higher one's cultivation, the deeper one's understanding of Tao techniques. The divine abilities and Tao techniques that could be created would also be more powerful. However, it could only be deduced with the Yen sect's Tao technique, and was useless with other Tao techniques. After Tang Yu understood the use of this secret technique, he couldn't help but feel excited. With the support of this technique, wouldn't the Yen sect no longer lack divine abilities and Tao techniques in the future? Originally, the Yen sect lacked the ability to fight. If it was in a place with weak spiritual vigor, it wouldn't matter as the Yen sect dominated. However, it was different in a place where spiritual vigor flourished. Various cultivation sects could be found everywhere, and all kinds of powerful divine abilities and Tao techniques emerged one after another. The weakness of the Yen sect's lack of fighting techniques was revealed. But now that he had this technique, he could make up for this shortcoming. He was both excited and secretly proud. He said, "The people of Shuqing are really short-sighted. My Yen sect has its own superior techniques. How can other techniques compare to it?" His innate talent and comprehension were extremely high. It didn't take him a few days to master this secret technique. He then began to deduce divine abilities and Tao techniques. In just a few years, he had derived a divine ability from this technique and passed it on to his fellow Taoists. It wasn't that there weren't others who had comprehended this secret technique. Because they were cultivating the same technique, and it was still their first attempt, they didn't hide anything from each other. They often exchanged divine abilities with each other and learned from each other's strengths to make up for their weaknesses. Not only that, they even directly used the heavenly ghost tribe, which was close at hand, to test it out. After more than 10 years, the fighting ability of those who studied the Tao here had greatly improved. In fact, he didn't know that it wasn't just in the mountain and sea realm. All the members of the Yen sect who worshipped the sect ancestors' memorial tablet or had the inheritance stone tablet had received this secret technique. Originally, the Yen sect lacked offensive techniques. Now that this weakness was gone, its strength began to expand rapidly and it began to extend its tentacles to some places where spiritual vigor flourished. Zhang Yan saw these changes and nodded slightly. After knowing the true use of the Tao techniques, he paid more attention to this matter. Before completely changing the Bush Tian Weili and officially stepping into the third stage, he would do his best to promote the Yen sect behind the scenes and strengthen it for future use. However, the Yen sect still lacked the upper level of fighting power and could easily be destroyed by some large sections. Due to deep reasons, it wasn't good for him to directly intervene. What he could do now was to spread the Tao techniques as much as possible to ensure that the Tao techniques wouldn't be lost. Chapter 2178. After sitting in meditation for 50 years, as his consciousness advanced, Zhang Yan could pry open more and more Weili, and his progress was much faster than before. He knew that he would soon be able to use all of Busushan's Weili. However, he also discovered that if he tried to entrust his Weili to Creation Pauline, there would not be any leakage of external force, and it would not trigger any changes in the heavenly secrets. This meant that if he used Pauline's protection, then before he took that step, others might sense it, but they would not necessarily know where the problem was. However, because Busushan's strange power had not been completely eliminated, there were still some loopholes, so anyone who paid attention would be able to sense it. Just as what Yuan Mei had said, although his advancement would not trigger that existence, but Ji Zhuang and Yao Han might not allow him to enter the third-degree realms so smoothly. They might even try to obstruct him, so this was a place where he needed to take precautions in advance. After thinking for a while, his thoughts moved, and the figure of the Taoist appeared in front of him again. Although the face was still blurry, compared to the last time, the figure was no longer illusory, but much more solid. He asked a question that he had long wanted to know. Fellow Taoist should have had Creation Pauline in the past. May I know where this Pauline is now? Before the essence of creation was broken, every virtuous virtue should have a Pauline in hand, so he wanted to see how this person would answer. Although the other party had taken the initiative to transmit his thoughts and told him the way to enter the third stage, it did not necessarily have friendly intentions, so he wanted to use this opportunity to test the other's attitude. The Taoist did not speak, only pointing. However, Zhang Yan felt a wisp of qi being transmitted from the figure, and it was coming towards him. He thought about it in his heart. Pauline was attracted to each other, and he had a lotus petal in hand. If he added this wisp of qi, he might be able to find the whereabouts of that person, Pauline. However, this would not be easy, otherwise Yao Han, Ji Zhuang, and the others would not have waited until now to find Pauline. Now he was racing against time with Yao Han and Ji Zhuang to enter the third stage before the two Weili returned, so he could not wait to find this thing, so he had to act as soon as possible. However, there was no need for Pauline to give up on creation. After all, this thing still had great use. Even if he could not find it now, when he entered the third stage, it should be relatively easier to search for it. As for the Taoist releasing this wisp of qi, could it be to intentionally lure him to go and then secretly use it to return? There was no need to think about this, the person did not have such great ability. The reason Yuan Mo's incident happened was because his strength was low, and the person behind the scenes was also a treasure spirit, so they could devour each other. If it was a cultivator with a human body, it would be impossible. The only thing he had to guard against was that before he entered the third stage, he had to make sure that the Taoists could not disturb him. Here, he only needed to disperse it. The other party was already in pieces, and without the support of his Weili, it was no longer a threat. Patriarch Yao Han was sitting in meditation when he suddenly felt something in his heart. It wasn't as abrupt as before, but lingered around him. Although it wasn't a warning, it was a reminder that something related to him was happening, and it had a profound effect on him. He tried to calculate it, and his heart jumped. He had no way to calculate the real result, but he could confirm that it came from Busu Tian. There were not many things that could affect him. Even if he did not use the divination technique, he could roughly guess what it was. His expression was somewhat uncertain. In the past, he had never treated Zhang Yan as his main opponent, because the latter did not have the creation Pauline. Under normal circumstances, it was almost impossible for him to enter the third stage. Even if he could, he did not think it would be faster than him recovering his strength. But now, it seemed that Zhang Yan was likely to be ahead of him, so he had to be careful. When Yuan Jin met with Zhang Yan, there were a few things he said that were correct. Entering the third stage of the spirit refinement realm meant stepping onto the path of battle. Even if Zhang Yan did not have any plans to deal with Yao Han and Ji Zhuang, the two were still worried that he would harm them once he succeeded. Ancestor Yao Han kept thinking. If possible, it would be best to stop this. However, he was limited by his own cultivation, and his Pauline was not complete. He could not shake Busu Tian. Otherwise, the clans would not be in such a deadlock. Just as he was deep in thought, a ray of spiritual light suddenly flew over. He summoned it and saw that it was Taoist Ji Zhuang who had sent him a message. He could not help but smile playfully. Ever since he recovered a portion of the Weili, the two of them had maintained a friendly relationship on the surface, but they had been secretly targeting each other. They had not communicated with each other in private. But now that this person had come to invite him, he must have sensed it and could not sit still. He thought about it for a moment before his body flashed and he arrived below a spell platform. Ji Zhuang Daoren cupped his hands and said, "Please come up for a chat, fellow Taoist." When Patriarch Yao Han arrived at the altar, he bowed and sat opposite Ji Zhuang. Ji Zhuang Daoren said, "Fellow Taoist, do you know why I invited you here?" Ancestor Yao Han sighed, "I didn't expect that in our bitter struggle, this person would be ahead of us. I wonder how this Pauline, who has no fortune, could reach this step." Ji Zhuang Daoren was expressionless. As I expected, it was the collision with Pauline that caused the void to crack, allowing Taoist Xianyuan to obtain the fortune. Ancestor Yao Han knew that he was being blamed, but he did not feel embarrassed. Instead, he laughed, "Then it is the will of the heavens." Taoist Ji Zhuang said, "We have to find a way to stop this. Even though we don't know if Taoist Xianyuan will succeed until the very end, but if he manages to grasp that sliver of heaven's secret, then we might not even be able to rely on him." Ancestor Yao Han said, "Then what do you have in mind, fellow Taoist?" Ji Zhuang Daoren said, "We cannot force this matter. Taoist Xianyuan is Busu Tian's master, and he controls many places of fortune. If he refuses to come out, the two of us will not be able to take him down even if we work together." What he said was one of the reasons, but there was another. He wanted Zhang Yan to help him maintain the heavenly order. If he directly went to Zhang Yan's doorstep, Zhang Yan would definitely overturn the previous agreement and lead the cultivators behind him to fight against him. If that happened, all his previous actions would be meaningless. Right now, he wanted to suppress Zhang Yan, but at the same time, he did not want to suffer too many losses. Forefather Yao Han smiled. He knew what Ji Zhuang was thinking, so he said, "You're in a dilemma. But if we call on Yuan Mo, who knows?" Ji Zhuang Daoren's attitude was very firm. Yuan Mo's origin is unknown, and he has the ability to control Pauline. He is more of a threat to us than Taoist Xianyuan. We cannot use this person. If there is a chance, we must find a way to get rid of him. If the three of them pressured Busu Tian together, they might be a threat to Busu Tian, but how could Zhang Yan give in? If there was a conflict in the end, he was not confident that he could do anything to Zhang Yan. Moreover, Yuan Mo would not truly be on their side. It was not hard for him to imagine that once Zhang Yan was eliminated, he would be next. If Zhang Yan was still around, it would be more beneficial for him. Ancestor Yao Han said, "It seems that fellow Taoist already has an idea." Ji Zhuang Daoren said, "This is what I have been thinking. If he wants to go to the third stage, he must take that step. But he does not have the fortune of Pauline, so maybe we can, Ancestor Yao Han narrowed his eyes, then said meaningfully, "What if he comes back soon?" Ji Zhuang Daoren said, "Then it depends on how fast I am." As they spoke, they felt another throbbing. But this time, the two felt some kind of threat. They were probably plotting how to stop Zhang Yan, which affected the karma between them. Previously, Zhang Yan had only threatened them. It was hard to say whether he would attack them. But if they really made up their minds, the situation would immediately change from a peaceful confrontation to an intense battle. The two of them went silent for a while. Clearly, they understood that they had already offended Zhang Yan the moment they decided to act. The path of obstruction was different from anything else. If the other party really succeeded, he would definitely not be polite to them. Ji Zhuang Daoren said after a long time, "We have no other choice. We cannot sit by and watch him succeed. We can only try to divert his path. Moreover, if we succeed, we will have nothing to do with him. It is a good thing for both of us." Ancestor Yao Han said, "That is not a good thing. But fellow Daoist is right. Even if I do not want to offend him, there are times when I have no other choice." Ji Zhuang Daoren knew that he agreed and said, "When that time comes, I hope fellow Daoist will not hesitate." Ancestor Yao Han smiled and said, "I don't want to see anyone above me." With that said, he stood up and disappeared with a wave of his sleeve. On the other side, Yuan Mei was still in the land of fortune, tidying up his broken Weili. Ever since he arrived here, he had been on guard, afraid that Yao Han and Ji Zhuang would come to find trouble with him. Fortunately, everything was peaceful outside. What he worried about did not happen. As the Weili gradually recovered from chaos, he felt that as long as no one disturbed them, it would not take long for them to recover. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something, and he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. He hurriedly tried to deduce, and it didn't take long for him to roughly guess where the source of this place was. He quickly calculated in his mind. The first thing that came to his mind was not to stop them, but to use this to his advantage. He believed that although Zhang Yan was on the path to the third stage, he would not be faster than him. Now, as long as he could straighten out all the Weili and borrow the power of fortune, he could take that step at any time. He was just worried about Yao Han and Ji Zhuang, so he had been looking for a way. But now, he realized that maybe he could use this to his advantage. Yao Han and Ji Zhuang would definitely place their attention on Zhang Yan when they came down and he had the good fortune treasured lotus. As long as he carefully concealed himself and hid behind Zhang Yan, his journey towards the upper realm would not attract their attention. When he officially stepped into the third stage realm, it would be impossible for them to stop him. Chapter 2179. Although Zhang Yan was still in a meditative state, Yao Han and Ji Zhuang's plan had given him a premonition of danger. Even though the two of them had used creation Pauline to conceal it, after his qi and strength merged, his senses were unusually sharp, and he was able to determine where the source was coming from. Moreover, only these few people could pose a threat to him in the void. He thought about it and did not pay too much attention to it. He continued to immerse himself in changing the Weili. After these people sensed his progress, they would definitely try to suppress him. It would be strange if he did not do anything. No matter what, he had to take this step, and he would not stop because of this threat. If the two of them were to walk in front of him, then he could only be at their mercy, and this was something he would absolutely not allow. As he changed the Weili, he gradually felt a resistance. This did not come from Bushutian's Weili, but from the foreign power that had retreated to the depths of the Weili. Every time he advanced a little, it would retreat deeper, and because of this, it would become even more stubborn. Moreover, it seemed that this power could change infinitely, so he would never be able to completely expel it. Expelling these foreign powers was not his goal. He only wanted to completely change the Weili. If he could do it without expelling them, then he would not have bothered. But the problem now was that if these foreign powers did not get rid of them, there would be a strand of Weili that could not be changed. Even if it was very small, even if it was missing a strand, it meant that it was not complete. Seeing this, he did not blindly attack. Now that he could use 99% of Bushutian's power, he did not need to use his will to make Bushutian complete the last step. With this thought, he pushed Bushutian's Weili to wash away the impurities on its own. If the foreign powers could retreat when he expelled them before, then they could not retreat when faced with the automatic rejection of Bushutian's Weili. No matter how stubbornly it resisted, it was useless, and it was gradually expelled from the world. When Zhang Yan saw this, he immediately used his magic power to wear it down. He did not hope to completely remove it, but it was enough to make it linger outside. Otherwise, if the Bushutian's Weili stopped changing, it might be invaded again. As all the strange forces were pushed out, he suddenly felt a sense of freedom. Bushutian's mighty force became as smooth as a finger, and all the obstructions disappeared with a single thought. His eyes flashed. He had finally reached this step. Now, all of Bushutian's Weili was under his control, and as long as he was willing, he could go to the higher realms. Without any hesitation, he turned his divine will and looked at the mighty force. In an instant, it was as if there was a river so clear that the bottom could be seen. Countless mysteries that were originally buried deep within were reflected, and many things that he did not understand could not help but be enlightened. If he wanted to enter the third realm, he had to understand the Tao of being and non-being. Everything was being, and emptiness was non-being. Having self was being, and non-self was non-being. Something could be born from non-being, and being would naturally become non-being. From small creatures to spirit refinement almighties, they were all under the restrictions of the great Tao. Before closing the door, cultivators would be able to see the various restrictions placed on themselves by the Grand Tao. If they could break through this barrier and escape the restrictions, then they would be able to transcend. However, if there were no restrictions, then they would not exist. So once they went to the higher realms, they would be lost outside, and they would not be able to return. This could be called transcendence, but it was not the transcendence of the self, because they no longer existed. So only by finding the boundaries of their own limits could they obtain a higher level of power without being too restricted by the great Tao. In order to achieve this, they must have something to entrust to the world, so that they wouldn't be too far away from being. The creation Pauline was extremely important here, because not only could this thing be entrusted to one's Weili, as long as one could still feel the power of Pauline, then they wouldn't fall into such a predicament. They would be able to restrain themselves and rush back before they truly reached non-being. With this thing, one would have the foundation to stabilize the world. But he didn't have this thing now, so he could only entrust it to the body of strength. At the same time, he had another thing to rely on, and that was his own Tao inheritance. As long as the evolution sect still existed in the world, and this Tao technique that he had established, then even if he went to an extremely distant place, he could still rely on it to return. In order to ensure that there were no oversights, he deduced again. At this time, he discovered that although the body of strength wasn't the creation Pauline, it was extremely suitable to be entrusted to his Weili, as if it was tailor-made for him to advance to the third stage. This was also very reasonable. After all, the creation Pauline wasn't a cultivator's own thing, but was found from outside. It was only infused with qi and fused with his own body, but there were still some flaws in the end. These flaws didn't seem to be anything, but when it came to determining where the boundary should fall, the slightest inconsistency could cause one to be unable to determine the final landing point of the boundary. Perhaps one could clearly go to a higher place, but had no choice but to stop and advance, or perhaps one could already no longer go forward, but still feel that one could move forward. And the body of strength was completely himself, so it was naturally incomparably compatible. At this time, his eyes moved slightly, and many thoughts flashed through his mind in a split second. Perhaps this was the intention of the master of the Devil Treasury when he passed down this technique. However, from the perspective of the technique, the master of the Devil Treasury himself should at least be at the level of great virtue. Logically speaking, there was no need for him to go back and do such a thing. It was just that there was no way to decipher the true purpose of this person, but as long as his cultivation went up, he would be able to find out sooner or later. After repeated deductions, he confirmed that his cultivation preparations were flawless. If he was willing, he could try to break through the limit of the great Tao at any time. However, entering the third stage not only involved himself, but also many internal and external factors. In order to ensure that he could successfully achieve this result, he needed to make arrangements here first. Currently, the main external threats were Ji Zhuang and Yao Han. If they came to stop him, what would they do? Zhang Yan guessed that it was very likely that when he broke through the boundary, before the Weili returned, as long as he found a way to remove the foundation of his world, then he would be trapped in the infinite Great Tao. Therefore, Bu Shutian's defense was of utmost importance. If it came from a frontal attack, there was no need to worry too much. Although he had climbed to the upper realm and his Qi Dao body had broken through the limit, his strength Dao body was still here. It was equivalent to him still being in Bushutian, which was enough to resist all external attacks. However, the other party had creation Pauline. Perhaps they would use a technique to suppress him, then the teachings of Yen would be very important. It could share a part of the power. Since they wanted to stop him from returning, then they would definitely suppress him together. The wider the teachings of Yen was, the harder it would be to envelop him. As for the method of directly killing the teachings of Yen, the other party could certainly do that, but it might not be of much use. Now that Bushutian's Weili could change according to his will, it would be very difficult for creation Pauline's power to take a detour and enter. Even if he really had a breakthrough and wiped out all the teachings of Yen, as long as he was still the master of Bushutian and the Weili still existed, then he could make them return with a thought. Only if he replaced them with an external sect, then there would be some possibility of cutting off the implication. On the other hand, if Ji Zhuang and Yao Han felt that they didn't have enough power, perhaps they could pull Yuan Mo along. For this reason, he specially sensed it and made a series of deductions, only to discover that there were indeed some strange signs at Yuan Mo's side, but it wasn't directed at him. This person's qi was about to be released, and there was a faint momentum of accumulating power, waiting to be released. This was very similar to the situation when he was about to enter the third stage realm. If he guessed correctly, it was very likely that this person was also prepared for everything, but he was afraid that Ji Zhuang and Yao Han would come over to surround him, so he didn't make a move. Afterwards, he felt that he was about to succeed, so he wanted to take advantage of him attracting the attention of these two people to secretly climb to the upper realm. He thought that if this person reached the third stage realm, he would definitely make that existence return. But even if this happened, it should be after he reached the third stage realm. Actually, the best way now was to send Yuan Mo into eternal silence. Unfortunately, this was just a thought. Other than having Fortune Pauline, this person was still guarding the land of fortune. Even if he wasn't his opponent, he wouldn't be easily taken down by him. And if Ji Zhuang and Yao Han noticed this, they wouldn't only care about him, they would probably also stop him. The only variable was the higher power behind Yuan Mo. But even if there was anything, it would have to wait until he succeeded before solving it. At this moment, he was already in the meeting hall. He then called for the formation spirit, asking it to invite all the spirit refinement cultivators in Busu Tian. The formation spirit obeyed and left. Not long after, Qing Sheng, Zhang Yuan, Shenchang Daoist, Shenchang Boy, Wan Fang, Bing Kong, Chen Shu and the rest all arrived. They all greeted, "Greetings, Daoist friend." Zhang Yan also returned the greeting. After inviting everyone to sit down, he said, "I called all of you here because I want to comprehend the Great Tao. During my search, there is a high possibility of external enemies attacking, so I need all of you to be on guard." Daoist Qing Sheng was stunned. His expression changed a few times, but he didn't say anything. Daoist Shenchang, on the other hand, was quite surprised. He bowed and asked tentatively, "Daoist friend said you want to comprehend the Great Tao, could it be?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Daoist Shenchang sighed, and there was some excitement in his voice. He said, "I didn't expect that Daoist friend would be able to take this step. I thought that my path was broken after seeing Daoist friend. Now that Daoist friend is here, I know that there is still a way forward." Daoist Zhan Yuan said with a solemn expression, "Daoist friend, you said that external enemies will attack. It must be Ji Zhuang, Yao Han, and those in the Mirror Lake." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Yes. Qing Sheng then said, "These people are not weak. If Taoist friend is not here, I'm afraid it will be difficult to resist." Zhang Yan said, "Although I have gone to visit Taoist, there are still some Weili here. If they come, they will naturally mobilize Bu Su Tian and a few other places of creation to help you resist the enemy. If he did not have any strength left here to suppress them, it would be difficult to guarantee that these people would still follow him. However, with the body of strength here, it was completely different." Sure enough, when everyone heard this, they felt much more relieved. After Zhang Yan gave them some instructions, he ordered them to leave. He still needed to make some arrangements at Yanjiao. When the arrangements were done, he could put everything aside and focus on climbing the third layer. Chapter 2180. Zhang Yan looked down at the lower realm. As he perfected the Dao technique and passed down the secret method of deducing the remarkable Dao technique, the sect Yan rapidly expanded and prospered. The only thing that was lacking now was the upper combat power. However, this needed a long period of accumulation. The sect Yan had only been established for a short period of time, so its foundation was still slightly insufficient. If he wanted to, he could indeed directly use the Weili to create countless powerful people. However, due to a certain reason, he would not do so. Currently, in the sect Yan, Gao Chengtu was the first person to establish the sect Yan. The strength of the followers under his command was also the strongest. After receiving his signal, under his efforts, he continuously got in touch with the followers of the sect Yan in the other worlds. Any followers who saw the sign of the sect ancestor were also willing to join together. This action once again received the spontaneous response of Zhang Yan's Weili. Not only did he set up a world as a place of worship for the sect Yan, he also erected a tablet that supported the heaven and earth. This tablet could be said to be the heaven and earth itself. Only the followers who had practiced the sect Yan's method could come here. After the disciples of the training of the myriad realms witnessed the mighty force of the creation of the world, all of them were indescribably shocked, and they all regarded this world as the headquarters. Gao Chengtu, on the other hand, had seized this opportunity and, in the name of the founder's decree, integrated the Yanjiao of all the worlds. If the Yanjiao's followers could only be said to be in a state of disunity in the past, then all the power had now been twisted together. Zhang Yan was clear about the changes here. Although he felt that these followers were already doing a good job, it was still not enough as a part of his foundation. Before he broke through the limits of the Great Tao, the sect Yan's power still needed to expand as much as possible. Therefore, with a change of thought, he erected a gate of 2 worlds at the headquarters. With this, he could go to the worlds that had not yet had the Dao technique spread. He only hoped that these followers could use the advantage of the sect Yan as much as possible to go to these worlds to spread the seeds of the Dao. However, to carry it out in those worlds where spiritual opportunity flourished, it would inevitably cause conflict with the local sects and sects, which would be detrimental to his own expansion. After arranging this matter, he retracted his gaze. At the same time, he stirred the Weili and fell into the silence. It was to spread the Dao technique to the world with existence. This action was clearly to tell the outsiders that he would soon try to climb to the 3rd stage, so he was trying to arrange more foundations of the Great Dao. But now, Ji Zhuang and Yao Han should already know what he was going to do, so he didn't do anything to hide it and openly put this matter on the table. At this moment, the silence seemed to have inexplicably quietened down. All the spirit refinement cultivators' magic power undulations also became abnormally calm, as if they were afraid of accidentally triggering something. It was obvious that everyone was waiting for him to take that step. Zhang Yan sat down. According to the transmission of thought and his own deduction, a cultivator at the 2nd stage of the spirit refinement realm who had the creation Pauline only needed to entrust his own power into the Pauline and turn it into nothing. Then, he could break through the limit of the Great Tao by using an object that was a level higher than him, such as the Pauline, to lift the Weili. Now that he didn't have such an object, he needed to entrust the body of strength to the Weili and then use the Bushutian Weili to lift it up. This was equivalent to changing the original 1 step into 2 steps. Now that everything was ready, he calculated a few more times. After confirming that there were no oversights, he looked at the world with existence in front of him, smiled slightly, and then entered a meditative state. The next moment, under the push of his mind, he entrusted all the Whaley into the body of strength. It seemed like it was only an instant before the power returned. In another instant, the Whaley was entrusted into the body again. As the Whaley was transferred back and forth, every time there was a change, the chi activity and mana would strengthen by a bit and continue to rise. This was the change of being and nothing. If there was something in the body, the great Tao would appear. If there was nothing in the body, the great Tao would disappear. However, this only allowed the mana to grow endlessly and could not reach the upper levels. Thus, he still needed to borrow the power of the Bushutian. With a thought, the Bushutian Whaley changed, came up, and merged with him. In the void, many things that he didn't know in the past rushed in, and he inexplicably had a kind of understanding. He stood up, looked up, and then gently pushed with his hand. With a bang, it was as if some restraint had been removed. In front of him, a bright galaxy appeared. There, the starlight intertwined with each other endlessly. This was the reflection of the Great Tao, the foundation that restrained everything. The Great Tao was invisible and could not be seen, but he was willing to let the Great Tao appear in front of him, so the Great Tao looked like this in his eyes. He could feel that facing the Great Tao, he was immersed in it, but he was also a bystander. He looked towards the source of the Great Tao. The further he looked, the dimmer the starlight, which meant that the restraint was weaker. What he needed to find was there. Without any hesitation, he took a step forward and entered the place. At this moment, his chi path dharma body suddenly disappeared from the world, leaving only his strength path dharma body standing quietly in the same place. Yuan Mei had been paying attention to the changes in Zhang Yan's aura. After feeling that the aura was getting stronger and stronger, he knew that his opportunity was about to appear. However, he was not the original Yuan Mei with an unstable temperament. He was a different person on the inside, so he did not make any strange movements at this time. Instead, he was more careful. He knew that Ji Zhuang and Yao Han seemed to be focusing all their attention on Bushutian, but he also knew that the two were still watching him. Thus, he tried to stay as still as possible. Only when Zhang Yan really pursued the upper realm, when the two's attention was completely attracted, could he start his plan. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly felt that Zhang Yan's aura had suddenly disappeared, as if he was no longer in the world. His spirits rose, and he thought, he's here. Ancestor Yao Han and Jizhuang Daoren also felt that Zhang Yan's aura had disappeared. The two looked at each other. Jizhuang Daoren said, "Let's do it." Ancestor Yao Han nodded and immediately released his magic power towards Bushutian. Zhang Yan should have turned into nothingness and gone to search for the limits of the Great Path. Thus, at this moment, he should no longer exist in the world. If there were no accidents, Bushutian would not put up any defenses against them. Even if there was an avatar there, under their attacks, he would quickly reveal a flaw. Now, it was up to them whether they could break in before Zhang Yan returned. If they succeeded, not only could they destroy his foundation, but they could also snatch Bushutian away. However, to their surprise, it was as if their magic power had hit a wall, and they could not move it at all. Although Zhang Yan's Chi Path avatar was gone, his Strength Path avatar was still there, so the defense was very tight. It was impossible to break in from the front. Although Yao Han and Ji Zhuang were a little surprised, they did not feel that it was unacceptable. Bushutian was Zhang Yan's backer, so they knew that it was impossible for him not to be on guard. Although they did not know how he did it, this method was obviously not going to work, so they immediately changed to another method. However, in the next few attacks, they found that Bushutian was almost like when Zhang Yan was here. He could respond at any time, and there were almost no openings to speak of. Jizhuang Daoren frowned. Did Daoist Xian Yuan hand over the position of master to someone else? He pondered for a moment. If that's the case, we can only kill his Dao avatar. The Dao created by Zhang Yan went from weak to strong, until it extended to him. Without this connection, it would not be able to become the foundation of the world. But they could use Creation Pauline's power to manifest this Tao and turn it into different Tao avatars of different levels. They only needed to destroy the incarnations of a few levels of the Tao art and sever the evolution from strong to weak, and they would be able to cause the Tao art to be incomplete. Then, the foundation of the world would naturally collapse. Yao Han Patriarch squinted his eyes. Without Creation Pauline, he would not have prepared for this. Ji Zhuang Daoren said, even if he did, without Pauline, he would not be able to resist it. Yao Han Patriarch looked at him and said seriously, fellow Taoist, you need to know that if this method succeeds, it will be fine. But if it fails, we will be implicated. Patriarch Ji Zhuang said decisively, it's just that Pauline might rebel a little. Even if it's a mistake, it will be fine as long as we appease her. Since our cultivation will not be affected, what is there to fear? Moreover, with the two of us working together, would we be afraid of losing to him? After the two came to an agreement, they lifted up Creation Pauline and waved it at Bushutian and the others. In just an instant, the Tao art of the Yan dynasty had appeared from weak to strong under the urging of this mighty force, and it transformed into Tao art incarnations of different levels of strength. Moreover, every single Tao art incarnation could be said to be Zhang Yan himself, and it could also be said to be the reflection of him at different levels of strength. If Zhang Yan himself was here, it could be seen that this was somewhat similar to the refining of the demon treasury. Yao Han and Ji Zhuang saw that things were going smoothly, so they did not hesitate. They waved Pauline again and sent their avatars in. However, no matter which level of power they went to, their avatars would also fall to the same level. It was just that they thought that they did not have to worry about winning or losing since it was 2 against 1. At this moment, the two avatars had already barged into the Tao and saw that Zhang Yan was standing there. They knew that it was his Tao avatar, so they immediately exerted their strength. Zhang Yan also looked over at this moment. He did not make any extra movements and only punched out. Boom! The heavens fell and the earth cracked. The two avatars instantly collapsed. Ji Zhuang and Yao Han felt that Pauline's power was in chaos, so they quickly appeased it. At the same time, the two of them felt a little baffled and did not understand what had just happened. It seemed that the avatar that they had sent over had been destroyed the moment they met Zhang Yan's avatar. The two of them discussed for a while and stabilized Pauline's power before exerting their strength again. This time, they used another level of power to enter, but the result was still the same as the previous time. After a few times, they finally realized that as long as the two avatars saw Zhang Yan's avatar, they would be destroyed with one punch. They had no power to resist at all. Their faces were a little ugly. This undoubtedly showed that even if the two of them joined forces, no matter which level of power they were at, Zhang Yan could crush them with absolute power. Not only that, after many failures, the power of Creation Pauline was in chaos, so they had to withdraw their power and try to appease it. On the other side, Yuan Mei had been waiting for an opportunity. Seeing that the two Pauline's power was in chaos for some reason, he did not dare to act rashly. He was afraid that the two of them would deliberately lure him into the trap. Until now, when they sensed that Pauline's Weili was suddenly in chaos, even their own qi dynamic was affected. This situation could not be faked. He was immediately overjoyed, knowing that the opportunity he had been waiting for was finally here. He immediately changed his mind and directly connected to the virtual image of Pauline.